Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the March 24th work session of the Croton-Harmon Board of Education and recommended action that the Board of Education approves the agenda.
So moved.
Second. On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose, abstain, motion carries. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the consent agenda as recommended, as presented, sorry. So moved.
Second.
On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, we will now begin the work session portion of our evening, and we will be starting off with a work session and presentation on technology from Dr. Jared Blair. But I will turn it over to Superintendent Walker first and
Yes.
lead us in.
Thank you, Sarah. And to be brief, I just wanted to say, I think you could make a really strong argument that there's no more important time to have a really high quality visionary technology department within the school district. We're so fortunate to have the leadership of Dr. Blair and an outstanding team around him. And we look forward to spending some time learning with them and from them tonight about some of the practices that are currently involved in our work around technology in the entire K-12 system, as well as the vision for what we see coming next. So I'm happy to turn the floor over to Dr. Blair, to Maria Salvi and Greg Kavanieri.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Superintendent Walker, and to the Board of Ed. Thank you for having us this evening. It's a privilege. I had mentioned this on Budget Saturday. It has been an incredible months. I don't even know how many it is at this point, since July, to be a part of this incredible team. I feel so supported, mentored, and I really feel like I can flourish in this role. So I'm excited to present to you tonight about the department. Just to give you a little overview, I've placed kind of our presentation into 6 main areas, focusing on leadership and vision, personnel, instructional focus, data privacy and security, infrastructure, and finally, innovation. So first and foremost, I'll talk about innovation, leadership and vision. And this really involves myself in terms of the way I'm conducting the work of the technology department. It's interesting, Maria and I, who I'll introduce to you formally in just a few here, we were having a conversation about the department, the technology department, right? And you have other directors that have teachers specifically assigned to that role, whereas in technology, it's everyone. It's every single individual, students, staff, every single person is influenced by this department, and that's huge. So my first piece that I want to focus on is building relationships, and that's something that I promoted from the day that I interviewed, the very first day. And it has been my priority to make sure that I have established relationships with everyone in a way that just builds collegiality and opens doors to that collaboration to ensure that we can really fulfill everything that we're intending to fulfill. So that is first and foremost my priority. And then from there, I think it's important that we start to think about a renewed technology vision. So our vision statement for technology has been established, but I think it's time that we start to look at that and really build a collaborative, renewed vision. So that's something that I have my eye on, and you've heard about the innovation team. I'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation, but I think that that's something that I would like everyone's help with. And I have ideas, but I'm excited to really get there and continue to start to build that. And then, of course, strategic planning. We're at an interesting place, Croton, at this time, because we're at the tail end of our 5-year strategic plan. So our next steps are many open possibilities. And I really hope to play a solid role when it comes to the strategic planning and implementing that technology vision into the vision statement for the district and the strategic plan for the district. The next section is personnel. I'm really lucky to be joined tonight by 2 outstanding team members. I have here to my left, Ms. Maria Salvi, who is our database specialist. And that is a brand new role to Croton. And I'm really excited to have Maria talk to you a little bit about her role and what she brings to the district. So I know many of you have heard of Maria, but you're seeing her for the first time. Miss Maria Salvi.
Oh, thank you, Gerald. Well, good evening, everyone. Happy to be here and happy to be part of this wonderful family, Groton Harmon School. And I would like to share with you a little bit more about and give you more insight what is a database specialist doing for Groton Harmon. So basically, what I'm doing right now is make sure that our data is protected. Our data, the student data, is complying with all the educational school rules for the Department of Education, and trying to make the data reliable for everyone, for federal reports and for the state report. So basically, that's the focus for the database specialist department. And we have some current projects, many things to do with the data. As I mentioned before, we need to make sure that all the labels, all the data complies with the rules, that the data is ready for the principals, for the directors, for everyone, on timely matter, with two reports, and the data transpire from one database to another database, from one platform to another platform without any issues. So for that, we need to focus and enforce rules, standardization, basically, and that needs to be done with every single type of data. Right now we have, in the presentation, I have assessment, I have some graded and standards that needs some work to do, and special education as well, data that needs to be complying with some standards.
Thank you, Maria. And also joining us tonight, who is here every night, man behind the scenes, Mr. Greg Kavanieri. I wanted to make sure that Greg had the opportunity to speak to you about his essential role and the functions of that role. So, Greg.
Thanks for having me. And I know I'm a normal member behind the producer chair over there, but I'll take a second to talk about my role, some of the responsibilities and work we're doing within our department. So, as you may have heard me mention a few times before, but the biggest motto I have for our communications effort is that multiple modalities maximize our outreach and our engagement with our community. So one of my goals within the department and things that I handle is to continue to develop and refine resources and information that are available on our website and utilize the diversity of multimedia to promote both community engagement and ensure ease of access for all of our stakeholders. So some of the areas that I oversee would be our content management system, which is a fancy word for our website, because there's a lot of links, materials, and multimedia that goes into that. Part of that work involves quality assurance. That means things such as the content, misspelling, broken links, making sure that our end users are getting to the information in a quick and easy way, as well as having it accurately on the screen. And then I also provide support for the search engine optimization, that's SEO, and accessibility. So how are people that are visually or hearing impaired, how are they accessing our information on our website? And is it an ease of access for them to get to the information that they need, whether it's a captioning or it's a way to translate to a different language? How are we having our content delivered to our stakeholders? With that, I also develop a multitude of what I call landing pages. So we constantly have new information available on our website, whether it's something like online registration that I teamed up with Dr. Claire to start this year. And it might be all different content areas from universal pre-K to budget information to various different landing pages that have a whole plethora of information available to the public. I also oversee our mobile app, which is available, a little plug-in, on both the Google Play and Apple App Store. Right now, we have about 1,450 downloads. That launched in 2018, and we average about 100 to 150 new downloads a year. So it's great to have a different way of experiencing the information across our website and also a mobile version of it. I also oversee some of the communication initiatives that are directed to me by the administrative team. So one of the efforts to foster Superintendent Walker's sense of community would be his superintendent video updates, which was a new addition to our communication cadence, as well as a Tiger welcome, which allows us to introduce some of the new staff amongst our Tiger community to those folks and colleagues across the district. With that, I also research alternative communication tools. As new tools constantly come up in the field of technology and communication, I would be one of the key people to turnkey certain technology or help implement the new technology within the district. I also have, as some of you know from the Communications Committee, a role to play in the district's visual identity and where that will lead in the future. So this is related to things such as style guidelines, templates, and letterheads for colors, fonts across our district and how we're going to reimagine that in the future. I also have tasks with the teachers amongst all buildings. So one of the major projects I've been overseeing the past 2 years is the CMS, or the Content Management System, is a solution for teachers to have their class pages. So one of the things I'm currently in the process of is taking the classic Google Sites platform, which is one of the vehicles that teachers use to get information to some of the families and students, and moving that to the new Google Sites, which is a better tool for them to not only build and maintain their sites, but embed different materials within the content that they're used to building. So I'm migrating the rest of them to a new platform. I also have another big task. As you know, I do a lot of video work for the district. So I also oversee the video hosting for the entire district, whether it's Board of Education content, school plays, ceremonies, all that needs to get housed and hosted, because we need people to get our content and view it, whether they're consuming data on their cellular, they want the smallest size, but they want HD and they want closed captioning. So all those need to be housed and stored in a service. We currently use Ensemble through Lyric, and we're going to move that vendor, was acquired by Panopto. So I'm going to help oversee that with Lyric to make sure things get ported over and migrated successfully, as well as some of the new features that will be available because it is a new service that was acquired, and it is an upgrade. The other thing to continue my work in the technology and communication field is to continue to support all the end users, whether it is a community member or any of the staff on a day-to-day basis. So I need to help them if they have questions for proficient use of technology or any of their productivity tools. I also offer solutions and guidance to things across all buildings in terms of multimedia setups, a project or idea a teacher may want to try and implement. I'm another level of support for them to bring new ideas to me and how can we make it happen in reality. And the last thing, as I mentioned too, the multimedia preparation for successful events, like our Budget Saturday, like our board meetings. How can we use new technologies such as the owl camera here? So if we have a remote participant, how do we avoid the shrieking feedback noise that a lot of conferences entail during the pandemic? And as we use these new tools, what technologies can we move with us to the future and enhance our conferences and meetings? And also I work with the administration to reimagine some of the spaces. So the room that we're in, the community room, is one of the big projects that we'll take on to make it a multi-use space. So we're going to see how we can configure different setups in terms of furniture and what it means from an AV standpoint to ensure that it can be utilized in a multitude of different ways for both faculty, staff, and the community when we have our board meetings. So that was just a really quick rundown on a lot of things that I do in district. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And I'm always looking for ways to improve both technology and communications for the team.
Thank you, Greg. So as you can see, we have talented staff all around. And again, the outreach from this department hits everyone, right? And affects everyone. So we have to consistently think about ways in which we can use or leverage technology to improve the work of everyone within the district. So what I'd like to shift now towards is the instructional focus of the department. And as we also talked about on Budget Saturday, COVID-19 changed everything. The pandemic really changed the way in which technology became a true focus and a tool to ensure access to education. Many vendors opened up freeware that typically would ask for subscriptions to software, and that was great. That was essential for our ability just to kind of last minute make sure that we were able to kind of anchor into the ability to provide access for those technologies to everyone. Now, at the end of the pandemic, and we're not over it, right? But we're getting there. These technologies now require the subscription. So we're kind of in a situation where everybody was using everything, and we have to really be careful in making sure that the tools we're using are not duplicated to make our budget more efficient, but also to make sure that the tools are relevant to the instructional need. So we talked about the one-to-one device implementation. That was a major change in terms of Groton Harmon schools. We had started one-to-one device implementation in the middle school prior to the pandemic, and we made the decision to just go ahead and do it K-12. It took a lot of resources. We pulled together literally every device that we had to ensure that it could be distributed to every student. So that's done. The hard work of implementing one-to-one is done. However, there's pedagogical implications when it comes to actually using these devices. And now it's time to, yes, the device is there. How do we use it effectively? So this brings in interesting opportunities. We're looking at curriculum maps with fresh eyes in terms of our work in transdisciplinary unit planning. So while these unit maps are open, I'm encouraging teachers to really look at how is technology being implemented? In what ways are we using technology tools? Are we having kids use Google Slides? Are we having them use Google Docs to collaborate? And I want to make sure that those events are documented, because we do have, I'm going to skip to the third bullet on the right-hand side there, the New York State Computer Science and Digital Fluency Learning Standards. They started to roll out in terms of an awareness phase just prior to the pandemic. And then, of course, it got a little muddled. It's time that we go back to those standards and really look at where in our curriculum are these major standards being addressed, and how do we articulate that both vertically and horizontally for all students. So it's really important that we do that. One of the ways we can do that is through professional development. We do utilize the model schools environment through both Lyric and Putnam Northern Westchester. We're lucky in the sense that we have both major organizations to help us in that sense, offering high quality professional development to our teachers. But there's other ways we can provide this even in addition to the model schools. I've had teachers approach me and say that even before the pandemic, there was almost like a tech sharing event on a superintendent's conference day, and they'd love to see something like that come back because there's power in sharing with our colleagues the tools that we've learned, because you'd be amazed at how many times you find, oh, I've never heard of that resource. I can't believe it's available. So I have a goal to ensure that we're able to really make what we have available truly visible, almost like a menu, right, of options for our teachers. So if they have sort of a pedagogical task, in what ways does the technology complement that? So that's something that I'll be looking at, and definitely going through all of our professional development modalities. But I think there's power, again, in collaboration within our own system here. So just ensuring that learning is effective, challenging, and engaging for all. I have an interesting opportunity also within this position to really dig into pedagogy, right? And really say, is this strategy correct, the best way to take in terms of this task, or do we want to look at other ways in which we can implement the instruction? So, and then the last bullet there, just evaluating technologies for their greatest impact. Technology is expensive, right? And technology is not necessarily going to last forever. So we have to be really thoughtful in the way that we select technology for the purpose and ensure that it will be sustainable as long as we can have it. So that's where I'm focusing the instructional focus is on that one-to-one device implementation as we move forward and maintaining some goal setting in terms of how those one-to-one devices are used. And I think it's important to think about the balance, right? Yes, the students have a screen in front of them. It shouldn't be in front of them all the time, right? So that's something I'm always trying to advocate because we need to look at the health and well-being of our students. So it is not the end all be all. It's complementary to what our student experience is. So it's some exciting stuff. Data privacy and security. This is huge right now in terms of the news. You're hearing about cybersecurity. You're hearing about the threats of cyber attacks. So I thought it was important to just really talk to you about how we're ensuring data privacy and security are at one of our highest priorities throughout the department. So first of all, we have compliance. There are local Board of Ed policies that have been designed based on state policies and federal policies. So that compliance piece really helps focus our efforts on data privacy and security. So we use those as guidance, and then we try to go above and beyond that compliance piece. The prevent and mitigate harm, we have to audit our system on a consistent basis. So this year, we've used Blue Orange, which is an audit agency for our cyber security as it stands. I know the question came up at Budget Saturday about cybersecurity insurance. And I believe that was shared with you in terms of our policy, but that was also passed by this audit. And it was more than sufficient in terms of their viewpoint. But through this audit, we're getting a report, and my team through Edutech is already starting to kind of develop a plan of action as we move forward to mitigate any types of maybe high risk items. I'm happy to report that what I've seen is nothing out of the ordinary. Typical areas of vulnerability, which especially include printers and the printer network. So we're really taking a keen focus on that. But it is through that audit procedure and through the professionals that we're really helping to gauge an understanding of where we're at and where we could be to just continue to bolster that cybersecurity prevention. So the last is protect, inform, educate. The best way to prevent a cybersecurity incident is through education. The most vulnerability is through email and phishing scams. So I'm happy to say I've already presented reports to the board about our first phishing test. Our staff may not appreciate it or like it. It's not a pleasant experience, but we do schedule at least 2 a year. This year, we're actually going above and beyond and going to 3 because I think it's so essential to gain that data around who is willing to give out information or click a link, click a downloadable file, which then opens up a vulnerability to our network. So what I saw after our first phishing test, I'm seeing that the education has paid off. We are mandated by the state to provide training every year. So we use modules that we purchase through the RIC, and they're vetted, they're great, they're more than sufficient, I would say, in terms of really making that awareness just on the constant forefront of your mind. And I actually try to send as many emails out as I can about just little tips and ways to make sure that you're staying as vigilant as possible. And I would say that our staff is pretty vigilant. So education is our best line of defense at this point. Ed Law 2D compliance. So I talked a little bit about policy. So Ed Law 2D is a New York State policy. It's based off of more of a federal policy, but it's New York State's interpretation, which is actually a little bit more vigorous in terms of Ed Law 2D and personally identifiable information of our students and our staff. So anytime pursue any type of software, whether it's free or paid, the vendor has to agree to our data privacy and security documentation and our parent bill of rights, which are both on the website if you're interested in taking a look at those. So the first step in this process, a teacher requests software, or a teacher might even say, hey, I can't access this anymore. The website's blocked. Well, there's a reason for that. And that's because the vendor, even if it's free, will not agree to the policy. And if they do not agree, there's no way around it. So after the software is requested, I then go out and I contact the vendor. I provide them with our policy documents, and they have to agree to them. A lot of times, this is not a straightforward process. There's a lot of back and forth. They'll come back, they'll have edits, they'll have strike through, and I say, nope, and I send it right back to them, and I say, there's no room here for negotiation. This is board policy, it's a local policy based on state policy, based on federal policy. You have to agree to this. So there's a lot of disappointment when it comes to certain pieces of software in terms of teachers, because they just want to have that ability to implement them. And unfortunately, fortunately for the privacy and safety of our student data and staff data as well, we ensure that these documents are signed off on. Once that happens and I get those documents, we have an inventory, which is also available on our website. It's software approved for use is the link. And the entire list is there with those documents that have been signed, so that teachers are aware of it. So I kind of referenced a menu. That's the best menu we have right now. I'd like to be a bit more maybe comprehensive in terms of how the tool is used and what it can be used for. But for now, it works. And I'm in the process of shifting our inventory from one tool to another. The tool that I'm shifting to is actually provided by the RIC, and it's been vetted by the RIC, and it's been recently updated. So you'll see that, you'll see some images and formatting change probably over the summer. So we're in the process of that right now. And then we have to just continue continuous renewal of these documents. So at the end of the year, we have to ensure that those documents are revisited. We have a rider that was designed with our legal team to extend it for another year. And then I just continue to push that out. I have had certain vendors say, we're no longer interested. We're not okay with this. Or you have vendors that will say, if you pay, we'll sign the documents, right? It's like it's a sales pitch in a way. So it's an interesting process. It's a vital process for the safety and security of student information. And again, at the forefront of everything that I do. So I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that process. Infrastructure. So also paying a focus to our safety and security. Infrastructure is an important part of that. We're very lucky to have 3 very, very talented techs through EduTech that are really overseeing our infrastructure, constantly updating me on where we're at with infrastructure and kind of where we're going. We're always talking about what's the next step to upgrade and bolster our infrastructure, not only for safety, but for performance. So recently, we've really upgraded our outdoor learning spaces with more access points to our Wi-Fi outdoors. We've increased our bandwidth. I mentioned single mode upgrades. This gets a little technical, maybe even a little too technical for my background. But thank God we have those EduTech members of our staff. Single mode is opposed to multi-mode, and it is considered to be a better fiber within our environment. So we're all single mode at this point. We also utilize Cisco tools, which is kind of the premium brand in the environment. So that was really reassuring when I came into the district that was where we're at. And we're lucky that the federal government provides us with what's called E-rate. It's been a 5-year process in which, because we maintain compliance with all of the federal regulations, especially considering the internet safety, all of those pieces have been fulfilled. So we're able to present our upgrades to, there's a process involved where we present them out for a bidding process. The bids come in, we evaluate them using a rubric, and then we select the vendor that basically won that rubric. And then we get compensated by the federal government for those upgrades. It's not a complete 100% compensation depending on the actual upgrades themselves, but it's significant. And that E-rate was developed by the FCC to ensure that libraries and public schools were able to continuously upgrade without a significant impact to the budget. So that's been very, very helpful. And finally, innovation. So you've heard a lot about innovation. We are really excited about the upcoming rollout of the innovation team. Recently, we did an all call for interested members, and I'm really excited to say we have about 35 individuals that comprise community members, parents, students, and teachers. So we're really excited about that. And I just want to really focus on the idea that this is future forward thinking, and it is truly embodying the spirit of everything that we've spent so much time and hard work on in terms of our strategic plan and our current work on transdisciplinary learning, and really just taking that and figuring out what's the next step with that. So this is really, really exciting times, really exciting work. And I'm really excited to get this underway and get everyone's feedback and ideas. I really think that it will be a very interesting and exciting thought exchange with the community and our talented team here. So that is the bulk of the presentation, but I figured you all have questions, so I want to make sure we have time to answer those. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Blair, and Greg and Maria. It was wonderful to hear a little bit about each of the work that you guys are doing. And so I will open up to the board for questions. Neil?
I have, as you can imagine, a bunch. I'll start just with one or two. And I guess the first thing that I was thinking about, maybe we'll circle back later, is you talked about the community computer science and digital fluency learning standards, which I have pulled up. What I'm wondering if you could talk about is in the area of two things. One is you talked about doing phishing exercises with staff. Okay, I'm thinking about phishing exercises with students so that they understand the same things that you're trying to impart to staff. The second point is in terms of the learning standards seem to talk in some ways about digital literacy and teaching students how to take what they might get on the internet and be able to consider, vet it, understand it, and understand where truth is and truth is not, or how to evaluate it. Can you talk a bit about both of those as areas that we might be looking at as a district?
Absolutely. So thank you for that. The first question regarding students and phishing, it's a great question. It's come up. We actually were thinking about it for our second phishing test. It's delicate, right? Because there would have to be real thorough communication with parents so that maybe parents were aware, but that compromises the test, right? So I think we have to really look at the best way to conduct that type of test with our students. The education about phishing is already happening. It happens, and this kind of talks to your second question or speaks to your second question, Neil. The digital literacy piece, which would include knowledge of phishing and other schemes, that is integrated into the curriculum throughout all areas. It's very difficult to teach that in isolation because we don't really necessarily have a course that's just on that. And it wouldn't make sense really, especially with in the spirit of transdisciplinary learning. It should naturally be folded into conversations. And I know for a fact that it even starts at the kindergarten level, right? When these students have iPads in front of them, teachers are helping them to understand that you can't just go and start pulling information from anywhere, right? We have to start to look at, well, what are the search terms that you've put into Google? Or what's the image that you're looking for, right? Like, we have to start to integrate that as early as possible and as often as possible. And those teachable moments can be expressed throughout any venue in which technology is being used. So the spirit of the computer science and digital fluency learning standards is that it's articulated in specific ways across all areas of curriculum. We don't necessarily have that mapped out, nor should we at this point, because these standards have really just flushed out. That is really our next step. And I think it's, again, a perfect opportunity now that we're opening up curriculum maps to look at ways in which transdisciplinary learning can be documented. It's the perfect time to say, hey, that's open. Where are you doing, where are you making the mark for these standards within this framework? So both great questions, but absolutely something that we'll continue to focus on and continue to promote with all of our learners K-12.
Actually, I just have a real quick question. I kind of, first of all, I'm sad that I won't be able to be a part of this dynamic team, maybe as a community member.
Next year.
Because it's really impressive, the vision that you've laid out and the team that you have built and put together. I am quite pleased at what I've heard. My question is actually, I recall we had to, as a board, do a education where we had to click in and do something. But maybe I passed the phishing test, or I would just want to make sure that because we are on the system, that we are included in those phishing tests. Because of course we get district email, and we too have the ability to click. So maybe I passed.
We received the phishing test. I know, because when I saw it, I contacted Jared.
I passed it.
Hey, this is
I didn't get my golden star.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate the spirit of it, and it goes to show you though that we are consistently monitoring. We have been educated about this and how important it is to the safety of our system, but we need to continue that, right? We don't want to become immune to it, because that's when the mistakes start to happen, right? And the most recent phishing test was interesting in that I selected, there's templates to choose, and you kind of find the time and the place for the right, I think it was like a COVID database resource, which is, that's kind of it's a hot topic, right? So anybody who did click on it and put in their district username and password were actually directed right to a video that they had to watch, and then they had to answer questions after the video. So it's a bit sneaky, but again, that's how we target those individuals. And nobody was identified by name. Nobody was even contacted by me, because it's not about shaming anybody, because this is how these individuals capitalize on our vulnerabilities, right? So it's important that we practice. It's no different than a fire drill, a lockdown drill, a bus drill. We have a phishing test, right? And yes, the Board of Ed gets the phishing test.
Great.
So keep an eye out. And unfortunately, we are seeing an increase. A lot of the tests, the actual true scams do get caught by our filter, and we're lucky that we're using Gmail. Gmail is pretty robust in terms of catching those and filtering them out, but they do make their way, and they're getting very, very sophisticated. We even have individuals who are getting an email from what looks like their email. And what we've learned, I actually consulted with EduTech, that there is a way in Outlook that you can build an email address that's not the email, but it looks like the email. And it actually, there's a narrative that says, I've been watching you, you need to give me this and this. That's scary. When you're confronted with something that jarring, people reach out, and that's what I've asked them to do. And we investigate, we take a look at the logs in terms of are people getting in at different IP addresses? And we're able to confirm, and like, you did the right thing, you reached out. Some people just delete it, which is great. So move it to spam, but definitely no links. Don't enter any information. I'll advocate that forever. So thank you.
And
Thank you.
I just want to add one thing, that what I always do when I see one of those is I look at the address.
Yes.
If you look at and click on that name and look at the actual address, if you don't recognize the actual address, or it is gobbledygook, or it's not, United States,
That's right.
And that's a training thing for students, and that you can do
Correct.
obviously without
the
actually
actual
doing a
test.
phishing.
Yes, exactly. And what I often do is, if someone reaches out to me with a concern, I will often respond to them, praise them, of course, right? Praise is always important. And then say to them, hey, would you mind if I took a screenshot of this and sent this out as an example? And then I'll send it out to everybody and just say, hey, this was a tough one. Keep an eye out for it. And every time I do that, it just plants an extra little piece of information and a tab to say, hey, this doesn't feel right. And that's all that education piece, right? So thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for this amazing presentation and for protecting our students and our community. With respect to this, I have a question regarding the PII. You had said that, when we work with a particular software, you send our standards without going into too much detail, because I can't imagine how thorough and voluminous that all is. Are we doing anything to educate our vendors regarding how to handle our PII?
There are times where I've had to, believe it or not, and sadly, I think it's important that vendors have a responsibility to, especially because it's a state law based on a federal law, right? And sometimes I'm surprised at how little these vendors in some ways pay attention to that. We are lucky. One thing that I did leave out in terms of the process is that if anything is purchased through BOCES has a staff that's able to go through and procure these contracts. So that's actually one less step for me, because we rely on what BOCES went through in terms of that process. So what we found, that there's power in numbers, and that's the whole point of the cooperative, right? So when you have all of these districts in a way demanding that they comply, that's really powerful. So I do tend to really reach out to BOCES as almost like a first line to say, hey, have you considered this vendor? Are they available? And even if they're available, let's say in Erie County, we can co-service that, and that same Ed Law 2D compliance applies. So yes, the answer is unfortunately, yes, we do have to educate them. And it is really unfortunate when you are in a situation where you have a free version and a paid version, and a vendor says, we'll sign off if you pay. Like in a lot of ways I say, okay, we're going to put this aside, we're going to find an alternative. And that's what I like to help our teachers with as well, because there's oftentimes multiple ways that different resources hit the kind of the same idea, right? So, and I think the really good vendors and the really well vetted vendors are compliant and respect the spirit of the legislation to protect our students and our staff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Josh.
So I want to ask a few questions about about this specific topic on Ed Law 2D and PII compliance. But what I'm really interested in here is the balance of types of software that we're using. I'm curious, and I don't need answers to these tonight, but it's something that I think would be interesting to see. I'm curious about what percentage of software is suiting some specific narrow educational purpose versus providing infrastructure for teaching. Because those are very different, the needs in those are very different. Because I think that applies a lot to standardization I always worry a little bit about over standardization. Because sometimes that can, you have to twist yourself into a pretzel sometimes to fit into this particular box. And if somebody can come up with a better mousetrap, that's great. But those mousetraps need to be EdLaw 2D, right? So I'm curious if we could get some, like, I don't need it today, but it'd be nice to see sort of over time the curves of what percentage of software falls into these different categories. And over time, are we seeing more requests? Is the curve going like this, where we're seeing an increasing number of requests for software and an increasing number of rejections? Are we seeing increasing number and decreasing number of rejections? Are we coming around the bend? That is what I'm saying. Is it getting better or is it getting worse with respect to compliance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it would be a really interesting metric to evaluate over time. I mean, even in these first couple of months of this position, as you noticed with the budget, the software expenditure is going, if the budget passes, will decrease by almost 50%. And the reason for that is that was something that I kind of came right in and took a look at to say, where do we have repetitive software that hits repetitive needs, right? And we have analytics through ClassLink, which is our single sign-on environment. It's called Analytics Plus, and it allows me to see through the Chrome browser all of the different sites that are used consistently, right? And the idea behind that type of analytics is to say, I can actually focus in and see, is one grade level teacher using it out of the rest of the grade level? Is the entire grade level except for one teacher using it? And those are ways for me to target professional development, to say, hey, is this tool really working? Can you show me how you're using it? And then if I find value in it, even if it's a free resource, I then can start to maybe spread it a little bit throughout that grade level in terms of equitable access to these tools that you had mentioned. And then on the opposite end, if I have like one teacher that's not using it, I want to make sure, is there a reason why, right? So, and then none of that hits that EdLaw 2D piece where maybe we're not using it any longer because they're not agreeing to the policy, right? So there's many factors there, but I would be happy to try to organize the data as we move forward.
I think that would be useful.
Yeah.
Another question that I had here is like, what do you have a sense of what percentage of the software that's being used in district is software as a service versus traditional single time purchase, install locally software?
We have very, very little of the latter any longer because vendors don't utilize single use software as much. And the instances that we have those types of services, that type of software, are in very, very specialized cases. For example, our Project Lead the Way engineering program, where it's one software, right? And it's essential to the program. So in terms of that specialty, the first piece that you hit upon, we're moving much more towards that. The ubiquitous software, we're talking diagnostics, right, that we're using for tier 1 decision making within the classroom, like Renaissance Star, for math and ELA benchmarks that we use 3 times a year. Those are pieces that are essential to our functioning. And I'm really happy to see how they're being used and the conversations around them. We even had a pilot this year. A couple of teachers from CET invested in ELA instruction and kind of expertise within ELA reached out to me saying that, oh, now Renaissance Star has a new feature called Mayan, which caters reading selections to students based on their performance on the STAR assessment. And I was like, okay, let's take a look at it. And they're currently in a pilot for that. And it's interesting to kind of see what their reactions are to that. And that would be, to me, we also use Learning A to Z and RAS Kids. Mayan might be a nice replacement and maybe a bit more sophisticated replacement because it's tied to student data as opposed to just Learning A to Z, right?
Got it. My final question is about physical hardware.
Yeah, sure.
I know networking hardware it changes every 3 years.
Yes.
The 3 to 5 years is your lifespan. That's understood. It's just moving so quickly as bandwidths increase, that I understand. We spent a lot of money in this district going back, started before I came onto the board, like starting 10 years ago on smart boards. Now we're rolling out all the smart boards and replacing with flat screens. My question is, what is our process for do we have a process? And could you comment on the process for evaluating the long-term ownership cost? What I'm concerned with is the concept of whether we spend less upfront and then have to replace it sooner, or spend more upfront and have to replace it and can get more use out of it longer out. I know that, but sometimes then you're making bets on technology.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could comment on that a bit, especially since we've been looking at new flat screens, and it's just a constantly moving technology.
Great question, and I'm happy to be able to talk about that because it is complicated, isn't it? The age-old question, like even just with our appliances, do we go big up front and hopefully it lasts forever? And most cases it doesn't, but we do. So I do have to give credit to my predecessor, Miss Deba August did a great job at evaluating what we have and making a plan for the future. So I inherited that plan, right? And part of what I did right off the bat, I walked through every building in terms of flat screens. Let's talk about that, and smart boards. I walked through every building in the summer with each of the principals and documented what equipment or hardware was in every classroom, just for myself, so that I had that inventory within my own documents, right? And I've created spreadsheets of every building to indicate whether or not they had a smart board or a new line flat screen. And then there's a few others like an in focus flat screen and so forth. The idea is that smart board technology is great, but the projector aspect, so a smart board has a projector on the outside, right? And that projects the display, and then the actual board connects and allows you to write on it. So the smartboard technology is not, it doesn't last. The longevity is just not there because the contact between the two surfaces fails over time. The projector bulbs are very unreliable. The projector will shut down if it's too dusty. Like we had a teacher that was like, help, I'm seeing that it's overheating. So the guys go in and they have to use a can of air to blow out the dust. And then, okay, suddenly it's working again. So the idea is that I really focus on the smart boards because I know that that's not a sustainable technology. And I really think that over time, that's not going to meet our needs. The replacement of those smart boards started with the new lines, really the new line flat screen technology. And that's been fine. But like you said, 5 years later, after its first implementation, we're noticing some inconsistencies between the boards. And they're outside of warranty now, right? So I have my due diligence to really invest in what's the current technology and what are these companies currently promising in terms of longevity, right? And the technology does get better and better. I hate to say that, but it does. It's not a cliche. So I'm using this spreadsheet to really gauge who has a smart board at this point, because I think those
Fewer and fewer, right?
Fewer and fewer, exactly. And over time, it will become flat screen technology. The other piece I have to focus on is that with the new line, I want to ensure that we get everything out of that vendor as these boards age. So I'm just recently, I contacted a representative from New Line who will be coming on site to deal with a couple of our issues. Like we have teachers claiming that as they write, there's a bit of a lag, which of course, as you could imagine, is very counterproductive, especially for our teachers of quantitative. Like I taught chemistry, I can't imagine writing out a chemical equation when it's not syncing up with me, right? So but the vendor promises that they have a solution for that. So it's a kind of a constant evaluating what we have, evaluating what we need to replace, evaluating how we can maximize stuff that's already starting to age and then continuing to look forward to the future. So it's complicated, but we're working on that. I feel confident with the system that I have in place right now to start just continuing the refresh, but I don't want to have to buy a new line every 5 years. That is not something I'm interested in. We have companies like Promethean who we've just started to sample. And of course, I want our teachers to trial the board, but Promethean is promising 34,000 hours of use. That's a lot of years.
It's a lot of hours.
I'm not really sure, if I really believe that until I see it, but I don't know where.
How did they test 34,000?
Yeah, I don't know. So again, you can only go based on what a company promises for so much.
That's true.
But it's a task and it's a tricky one. And you also have that equity piece, right? You have teachers who see their colleagues who have these beautiful flat screens and they've got this aging smartboard, and that's a tough one, right? But we can't replace all of them at once. It's just fiscally
You could have the opposite. You could have the teacher who doesn't want to be the guinea pig either.
That's correct. And I have teachers who have said to me, I don't want the new flat screen yet. Like I will wait until, and I think the priority comes like when the bulb burns out and then it doesn't work anymore. That's a priority, right? That's
And then they
urgent,
want it tomorrow.
right? That's right. That's right.
You're not going to install it overnight, of course.
That's right. So I thank you I know on paper, it's a lot of money that, when we look at these, but so what I've continued what my predecessor had set up in terms of approximately 15 replacements a year, which would be about 5 per building. We have areas like at CET, the 3rd and 4th grade wings, they're all the new line boards because they were all refreshed at once. So there's some areas where it's been done well and we can kind of focus on other areas of the building. We're also looking at our gymnasium spaces and revitalizing the way our PE teachers can use the flat screen technology within their curriculum. So that's exciting. And one of my questions was, can these boards be hit by a baseball? And they're promising that they're using correctional facilities and have been hit by chairs. So, I'm feeling confident about that, and I'm excited for that type of activity. So
I would hope you're not excited about chairs flying.
I don't anticipate chairs. I'm thinking, like a basketball,
Basketball
right?
people.
A basketball. I mean, if
Yeah.
I think they can handle it. So they call it Gorilla Glass for a reason, right?
Thank you.
I just had a question
Yeah.
about the customizability of the Infinite Campus for students.
Yeah.
Because in SFC, a lot of people were seeing like they wanted notifications,
Mhm.
so they didn't have to keep checking over and over again and stuff like that. So I was wondering if there's any like things moving towards that.
So it's a great question. There's some important pieces to consider with those types of notifications, right? Because as a teacher in Harrison, we had the portal for Power School, which is very similar to Infinite Campus. And I even saw the impact that having these consistent notifications had on my students. I had kids like checking their phone, like, oh my God, my grade just went down by 5 points. It was distracting, right? So I think that, yes, we should look into that. And I would absolutely, I encourage you and your classmates to reach out in terms of what you would like to see and absolutely consider that. But I'd like to find a balance because I don't want it to be a consistent barrage of notifications for you. Because as you know, all of your teachers are putting grades in at different times and assignments in at different times. So it's an important balance because that can be very anxiety provoking to have a consistent update. And you can imagine getting 5 notifications in a day to all 5 classes that notified you your grade dropped.
Yeah.
That can be pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
So I hear you, and I think with a balanced approach, I'd be absolutely open to evaluating that. Thank you.
Also go to Neil's point, the fish like talking with students. I think we learned some of that in middle school for media and communications mostly, especially like fair use and also like reliability of resources and stuff like that. That's a big.
However, that was in middle school.
Yeah,
That's true.
That's the point of the, we know that you have to constantly,
yeah,
remind and teach, deal with things, particularly more sophistication as kids, when they get to high school and then going to be dealing with perhaps considering issues in greater complexity, whether it's in history and social sciences or ELA. So, my question is, of course, all throughout K-12 and I do know that that's what's done in what is Ms. Rustanki's class.
Point taken, though, that's good. And I think that it would be interesting not only to task the curriculum and the teachers, but to task the students, right? We just finished a project, it'll be coming soon to a theater near you, where we do have a slight rise in Chromebook damage at the middle school. And so the student council wanted to meet me, and I was really excited, and they had questions for me, but then I had questions for them. And I tasked them, I said, what would you want to do about this? And we actually, Greg came with me, thankfully, and we went on, what was it, Tuesday after school, and we filmed a commercial, and it a la Saturday Night Live, a bit of a sketch comedy, and I think it's going to be really fun. So I could envision even something like that that's a bit student generated and student accessible in terms of even the phishing piece. So yeah, you've sparked an idea, so thank you.
Just a comment, maybe something that can ties some of this stuff together. I'd love to see, well, thank you so much for the presentation, Marcus. Sorry, Dr. Blair, jumped over that part. This is wonderful. I'd love to see maybe sometime next year a follow-up presentation on how, as technology gets more embedded in pedagogy, how the curriculum is changing. Because I imagine there's some aspects of the curriculum that are going to be de-emphasized and just use as an example, I'm not saying it's what you're doing, but handwriting skills, right? Versus typing skills, safe searches, email, texting etiquette, how that is being incorporated in the curriculum as you think about interdisciplinary learning.
Yeah.
I think it would be wonderful for us in the community to learn more about how that's happening in the district.
Thank you. And again, a balanced approach, right?
Yes.
Because handwriting is still important. But even to your point on access to data, right? And those bring up, we had Bill Daggett here, Dr. Daggett recently as a keynote speaker, and one of the pieces that he focused on is data is everywhere, right? So almost, as I'll use a chemistry reference, right? Memorizing the periodic table or even how to solve certain equations almost becomes different when you can now look it up. It's what's behind that. Yeah. What are the problem solving skills, the logic behind chemistry, right? The spirit of that's taught in chemistry. I think that helps us to hone in on those real fun pieces of education. So I think I'll take in, and I'd love to come back next year. So thank you.
Just what you said kind of ties in with what Mr. Griffith said to us last Saturday. I think you said at some point, artificial intelligence is going to do all of the mundane stuff. And what we need to provide our students is what you described, Jared, as the fun stuff.
Right. And to build on that, Neil, I appreciate that. And also to build on that I'm confident that artificial intelligence could never replicate human emotion and human connection. And I think that we need to continually build those skills in our students, because that's what's going to make students successful in the world that is run in ways by AI, right? Because it's one thing to go fast food and type on the menu, but you didn't get a hello, you didn't get a smile, right? And those are important aspects of life. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that as you continue to get to know me and we build relationships, I don't want to lose that. I want to continue to value that. And I think we're doing great work in our schools with that, but nothing replaces that.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the presentation. I also really enjoyed hearing about both your roles directly from you. I thought that was great. Thank you for sharing that. So I have a number of questions, but just to piggyback on what Anna was asking, for the Ed Law 2D, does that cover how long the data can be held?
Yes, it does.
And what is that?
I believe our policy it's a year. So if the vendor chooses not to extend the agreement, or if we choose not to extend that agreement, the policy states that they must dispose of that information. That is actually something surprising that some vendors do not want to agree to, because they don't want to be tasked with disposing of information, right? And that's a red flag to me. So it's an important question.
And do we have an auditing process to make sure that that data is correct?
So it's difficult because I can't go into their database, right, and actually find our data. And so we have to rely on the policy itself. And if I haven't been through any experience where we have any inkling that our data has been exposed, but if we are aware of any type of breach, we are obligated to notify many different parties, including parents, right?
Yeah.
That the data
I just
has
have a couple
been exposed.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah, just on that, but could we have in policy, because I'm wearing a policy hat now, incorporate in our policy and therefore in our agreement that the vendor must provide certification, not just we depend on it, because that's frequently what happens when you have data that in litigation is,
We should talk about that in policy. 'cause I
right, but I'm
haven't
just saying, is that
understood
something you think would be?
so I think, yes, I think it's important. I think we do, and I look at all ends of these questions. We have to be cautious because we don't want to scare all of our vendors away. Because there are certain aspects of our local policy, which again is an iteration, and I believe a more bolstered iteration of the state template that they give you. There are aspects that certain vendors say, I've never seen this before. And I'm like, "Oh, good." Right. So yes, it's possible. And I think it's up for further discussion. And I'd actually like to know what maybe other districts and maybe the RIC even would recommend.
So when you said, so there's federal, state, and when you said local, do you mean the Board of Ed policy?
Yes, I mean
Specifically our district.
specifically our district. But yeah, I think it's what 8635. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Did you have a comment?
No, just following up on that, we used to do that at Columbia, and we tied it to insurance policy, which was a lot less threatening to the vendor.
Yes.
To say, just an insurance requirement, just once you're done destroying the data, just fill this out so we can send it to our insurance provider.
That's
We had
crafty.
pretty
I
high
like it.
compliance.
Okay, so
Let's talk.
So,
I'm open.
So, and from what I understand, the Ed Law 2D covers the PII piece of it, right? So student name, maybe address, all those identifiers. What about data that is now being captured in surveys? So specifically the BEST tool, let's say, and the Panorama tool that has been used this past week. How about that data? Is that covered by this law? Or if not, what policies is it?
Yes, the survey tool, yes, it's a district tool. It may not be used directly in classroom instruction. Yes, the results will be used to help us inform instruction, but we went through the same process, right? And one of the pieces that I specifically had conversations with that vendor, we'll talk about Panorama specifically, is ensuring that data wasn't tied to a student record, right? Like a student identifier. There's no names within that template that we have to provide. It's student numbers, but I still needed to know, is the actual response data tied to the record number? And they ensured no, and they have policy on that. So that was something that we felt confident in terms of pushing forward with. And there are many other districts regionally. We actually purchased Panorama through our co-serve with BOCES. So we felt confident that it had been vetted. It wasn't just a one-off, right? That we were the only people using Panorama.
And when you say number, is that the actual student ID number? Or
Correct. Yeah. So the
that's
student ID number is not considered PII because there's nothing in it. And actually, like, for example, I had an email that I sent to one of our staff members today requesting report cards, and they asked for it by name. And I wrote back and I said, student number. And then I responded with the attachment, right? And that's like a little education piece, but that's a side note. In terms of the vendors themselves, those are clarification questions that I'm always thinking about in terms of protecting our students, especially when it comes to responses to surveys and things like that.
So for that policy, after a year, that data that in the surveys that the students have submitted to the vendor gets deleted. Is that correct?
Only if we allow the agreement to expire. If we continue working with somebody like Panorama, then they would have to continue that agreement to protect that data, whatever data. Our PII even includes our student email addresses because it's a first initial last name. And some vendors don't like that because they're like, well, it's just a last name. No, it's a name. So if we extend the agreement, they're signing a rider that fulfills the original agreement to ensure that safety. So it's when we close off that relationship, whether we choose not to use the service any longer, that contract then expires, sunsets, and we then have their commitment to getting rid of that data.
So just one clarification
Sure,
on that, I
yeah.
want to make sure I understand. So the answers that the students submit on the survey, through the survey tools, goes over, will that student's answers will stay there until the contract expires,
You got
even if it's 10 years from now,
Correct.
that student's data, with a
Correct.
student number.
Correct, but without being attached to any identifier. So they're saying that it's not even attached to a student number, the way they house it.
Oh.
Yeah. That was something we recently gained further clarification on, because we wanted to ensure in the delivery of that tool that it was more than.
Right, I mean, I think on behalf of parents, they could be very concerned that
Of
an
course.
outside vendor has responses that a child might make when they're 10, or 12 or 15, that could
Of
be
course,
used
yeah.
down the line
It's
in a way that
serious,
maybe
yeah.
it wasn't meant to be. Great, thank you so much. And then just on the reporting, so Maria, you mentioned you're doing federal and state reporting. Is there any are there any plans, kind of longer term, I guess, just maybe touch on for a minute, about reporting for parents, the community, the board, through the Infinite Campus tool? Is there any kind of reporting?
So I think maybe a clarification question in terms of, like, do you have any specific examples?
Well, just like the state data, rather, as opposed to going to the state, having something within district that provides different reports.
So the
for
reason we go,
constituents.
the reason we go to the state is that all of our data is based on student records, is housed within the state in terms of different levels of state data. And that I would only be comfortable going that route, because that we're ensuring the protection of that data. Like, as you go up levels, level 2, for example, is like the most secure, and the superintendent is the only one that can designate who has access. And I think it's you right now, Steve, like, that's the only one. So the idea behind that is that I would only be comfortable with reporting data that had been vetted through the state, because we have hit all compliance pieces, and we have hit the state's requirements in terms of the security of that data, if that makes sense. Maria, do you have any other thoughts on that piece, or does that sound good to you?
Yes, yes, sounds good. And just to reinforce what Jared said, yes, reporting data from that secure, the level 2 that we have, that only the student has access, is the most important part, because it complies with everything, all the rules and everything that needs to be in place for the data and compliance. And yes, so basically what Jared said, 100% needed.
Okay, thank you. And then just my last question, I believe at the budget meeting you mentioned you might be implementing a new curriculum mapping software. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Could you just talk to that a little bit, what that is?
Absolutely. So currently, all of our maps are housed in the Rubicon Atlas software, which huge task to document. Really well done, I have to say, because we did a curriculum mapping initiative in Harrison, and it's a lot of work, but the how thorough our maps are is really impressive. And it hits upon all of the core elements of really good unit design. When those maps were done, that was at a time when we had what we thought was the best elements of unit design. As we progress towards transdisciplinary learning and implementing these new projects, and really the true spirit of transdisciplinary unit design, we're finding that we're going to need some new tools. And we've also found through our vendor, we actually purchased Rubicon Atlas through PNW BOCES. John and I actually have a meeting on Tuesday to talk to the rep about new evolutions to that software that we don't currently employ, because there's a lot of transition that needs to happen. So there's moving pieces over, and you have to really look at it from an organizational perspective to say, well, do we just want an auto import, or do we want to import it and change it as we import it, if that makes sense, right? So that's one aspect, but we'd also like to vet other resources, because a lot has changed from the time that we selected Rubicon Atlas as our repository for our curriculum. So those curriculum maps are available on our website. You can kind of see what they look like now. So some of the features that I would be the most interested in, and we've gotten a little wind of, would be increased opportunities for collaboration. So in the past, teachers would all log in and add to courses. We have more integration with curriculum mapping software now with the Google platform, so that the map really could integrate into Google Classroom. If you're storing actual lessons or artifacts from a lesson within the map, you really then use the map to implement the lesson, if that makes sense. So it really increases the living aspect of the document. I think when curriculum mapping initiative started, it was like, put it in a binder, put it on a shelf, right? And that's not what we believe in here. We like to fit, but there's better technology, I'm convinced. We haven't fully explored or vetted what's out there, so I think that we're really
Sure to publish to the website. what
correct.
curriculum- Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I think Anna had a question first, and then Josh.
Go ahead.
Is this on the same line of everything that's being discussed? Because mine is like totally out of that.
No, mine's also totally out of that. So it made me think of something.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, because you've been talking about the classroom experience so much, if you could just talk a little bit about how technology is being used with respect to our athletics programs and like our arts programs in the school.
Absolutely. So if we talk about the athletics program, it's exciting to see that this district has already employed visualization tools for our games, right, to make them more accessible to viewers at home. I also think the idea of installing flat screen monitors in our gymnasiums, our high school uses one already on wheels, because they like to have the ability to move it out if they want to. I'm convinced, and I'm really trying to get them to agree to something up on the wall that they could use just as anchoring them to some learning objectives and having maybe some interactive pieces up there. So those are some elements to athletics that we're looking at. We also have like our golf simulator. Our software is, I think, out of date, or so we have to look into our next iteration of that. So that's exciting, right? Any type of simulation, virtual reality is pretty cool when it comes to athletics. In terms of the arts, what I've been doing recently is having Tech Tuesdays, where I like to station myself in the building, so I'm not in district office. I'm actually here in the building and allow teachers to come and speak with me about anything that they have. And I had a real nice response from our art program here at the high school, where we had some requests, like they would love to see the iPad Pros. So that's actually why I have this here right now, because I'm kind of piloting it and figuring out, do I like it, and could I foresee it being used within our graphic design program. And our teachers seem to be pretty happy with the flat screen technology. It's nice and bright and robust colors. And I think even going back to talking about the curriculum mapping piece, finding ways using this software to really integrate the arts into other content areas and other content areas into the arts. I think that that's some promising aspects of where we could go with this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just want to put a little bug in your ear about encryption
Yes.
in motion and encryption at rest. One of the biggest things that a lot of the big cloud companies are working on right now is moving away from the idea that data is ever in plain text except when it's being viewed by a human.
Agreed.
And I don't expect an answer on it tonight because I know it's a very big topic. But I just wanted to raise it. I don't know if you're thinking about it. If you are thinking about it when we get there. I mean, ideally, you know, our data is only secure as the physical device that it's sitting on, unless it's encrypted on the disk.
Perfect. I'm really happy you brought that up. So yes, it's on my mind. I'm trying to find ways to fiscally responsibly implement. I think at rest, first and foremost, I think that we need to start to bolster the way our users access certain platforms through like multi-factor authentication. We currently don't use that with Google. That gets complicated, especially for our teachers, because the primary method of multi-factor authentication is the cell phone. And that's a personal device, right? So we don't want to necessarily rely on that for our teachers. So we're examining, I'm having EduTech take a look at the fob, exactly.
I've got like 4 of them.
So, and what that technology is it's just a fob that you would have, and it randomly generates a code. And that code refreshes every 30 seconds, and you would have to then type that in to get into your email. Or so I know a lot of
The
districts.
kind that you plug in is actually better.
You can plug that in. The problem is we have a lot of different devices that have different ports. Right. So I agree with you. But we're looking into that. Absolutely. I think I'd like to establish that for our student information system. I'd also like to establish that for Google and for Gmail. A lot of districts have started with admin first because they have the most access typically, like sysadmin, and then you can kind of roll out. We can even provide it for students in terms of picture codes and things like that in terms of Gmail. So we're getting there. We'll definitely go there at some point. I just want to make sure that we choose the right solution for the organization.
Authentication is, you know, your encryption is only as good as your authentication. And your authentication is only as good as your encryption. So, but this is a thing to talk about. I don't want to take a lot of time on it now.
And I think
we should say to have a discussion about it again.
And just to address the emotion piece, I have Rachel DePaul, our new director of PPS, and I have spoke at length about a solution to encrypt emails beyond the encryption that Gmail provides to protect student information. So for example, I brought up the report card requests, right? I would prefer that report card gets sent to the parent requesting it through a more robust encryption setting, as opposed, so we can change the student name to the student number. That's great, but I would like all of that data.
Ideally, it should all be encrypted, yes. or put into an encrypted data store where you just pass the access to the data store rather than actually sending the whole.
And we
data.
have some great vendors that we've looked at that are actually vetted through BOCES. Virtue is one that we have our eye on that has been used. And again, I would slowly roll that out so that it felt natural. I think that it would be a bit cumbersome. If you could imagine as a parent, you would get an email from Virtue, let's say, the third party, and then you'd actually have to use a code and a different type of authentication to even open an email. And I think that would be challenging for parent-teacher communication, but for our PPS office, for our guidance offices, for our district office, I think that those are solutions that you're probably going to see by the end of this year. So thank you.
I definitely have to sit down and talk with you about one because I could talk for hours about this. I don't want to do that now. I don't want to do that
so
now.
I understand. So this is sort of like when a brokerage firm will send you something by, this is a security, you have to.
And if we're taking those steps to mitigate the risks of leaking our own data, right, our own financial data, we should be doing the same for our student data as well. So I completely agree with you. And yes, it's in the works. For sure.
Mary?
I just have one last point. I put it aside because I thought Omar asked it, but I did just want to follow up on the handwriting. I didn't want to start out with it either.
Example. I don't know what's happening.
No, but I did. But I did have that thought, and I didn't want to lead off with it because technology is the point of tonight. But I was wondering, are you using, is there research around like how to balance, what are the benefits of handwriting to kids still, How much should it be? Where should it be included? I know even with some of the assessments now going online, like there's not even a need for them to write essays anymore. So is there research, education research, is that being included and?
I am
your
the
philosophy,
most familiar with research that the tactile aspect of just handwriting in general is, brain to pen. It really ensures that connection. I think if you look at research about whether or not we go away from handwriting, we go completely towards technology, you're going to find both sides to that story. Again, I think at this point we need a balance, and I'm encouraged by what I've seen in our teachers, especially at our elementary school, where we have students learning handwriting and learning writing skills. I saw projects in the hallway the other day about it was a little research project, and you had students who typed and printed out their projects, and you had students who handwrote, and there was a choice there. And I really liked that. I was really encouraged to see that. And I popped into the teacher and I said, this is great that you're offering this choice, right? That you were still valuing both forms of media. And I think I have a responsibility to continue to pursue the research around that so that the balance fits whichever side we go towards.
I would just add briefly, Mary, that as we talk about multisensory reading training and Wharton Gillingham, as our CET teachers go through that, they'll come back and tell us that handwriting is a component of that the concept of the science of reading includes elements of specifically cursive writing and the importance of that from a research perspective in terms of learning to attach letter sound relationships and learning how to read.
Even text, I wouldn't be satisfied knowing that students only read text through a screen, right? I want physical, I do want some physical books. Even as a teacher of chemistry, I wanted students to have a physical textbook and never wanted the ebook. There's something about that hand to brain connection,
I love.
right?
And I do love when my kids are writing, and I personally agree with you.
Even writing on the screen is not the same, right? So until they
But
can
as we have
perfect
more,
that technology.
as we have more and more technology, we
Yes.
may need to have more like kind of like a standard or something, across.
Balanced conversations
That's right,
always, absolutely, point taken, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any? Lucas?
Also, to add on to that, are you also focusing on like things like eye strain and stuff like that, not just balancing things, but also balancing health?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's the physical implications, right, of using devices and ensuring that students are aware of changing blue light exposure and the effects of blue light exposure as you continue to progress throughout the day. Because I know you're not finishing your homework by 6 p.m. So. And it's impossible to do so, right? Like, are you going home to do homework tonight?
I have to.
So yes, and I think that those are we are digital literacy. Yes, that's important, but digital balance and health and well-being will always be an aspect of our curriculum. So, but I'm curious that, it brings up a good point. You're there, you're on the front lines, and I'm sure you feel it sometimes. Yeah. So,
Right, and then tie to social emotional learning. I mean, I think we're
Yes.
going to have a work session on that eventually.
Yes.
But how does all this technology, because the kids are on all the time,
Impact
tie
our
into that
students.
too?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you again. This was a
Very
fantastic
welcome. Thank you for
presentation.
having us. Thank you.
I will definitely, put you in for next year's work session schedule as well. But thank you again, and Greg and Maria, thank you for joining us. This has been very, very informative. So thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
All right. And so now we will move on to the second part of our work session this evening. And we'll be discussing the ballot propositions. So I will turn it back over to Superintendent Walker and Ms. Harrington-Cohen to start us off there.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And in continuation of the conversation that we began briefly on Budget Saturday, it's always great to have an opportunity to talk about The concepts around our ballot propositions may be alternatively titled "The Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round." And so just by way of introduction, I would say that I think the work of the bus electrification task force and the support of the community last spring put the district on the leading edge of an effort that I think all districts over the next 5 to 10 years are going to be engaged in. And that is a wonderful thing and should be celebrated. And we look forward to, I know I look forward to riding on the 66 passenger ESB as it begins to take the road in September. It also creates challenges and conversations like this one about where do we go from here and how feasible is it in this environment to continue that effort as we look at the goal of continuing to electrify the fleet and specifically what our needs are for September. And so as we kind of think about tonight's discussion and some of the questions that we're looking forward to answering and hopefully coming to consensus around as a team, obviously the first among them are we have the need, and Denise will talk about this a bit further. And I think actually Transportation Supervisor Joe Bernardi's
He is on.
available as well. He's out there. Good. All right. Hey, Joe.
Hello, Joe.
Hello, everyone.
Good evening, Joe.
Good evening.
Concept that our needs for September include another 66 passenger bus as well as a 20 passenger minibus. And so then we get into the concept of the cost of those and the options related to those, whether electric or internal combustion engine, to the district and to the taxpayer. And then options around what propositions around those decisions can look like. Obviously, we're talking about bond anticipation notes, as Denise discussed on Budget Saturday, and we'll discuss some more tonight. But longer term, the concept of a capital reserve to allow us to do some debt-free saving of money to help to defray the cost of, regardless of what type of vehicle it is, defray some of that cost going forward. And so you'll hear our best thinking on it, knowing that it's based on the premise that the community is interested in continuing the electrification of the fleet. And to be fully candid with you, as someone who's new to the community, that's hard for me to get a sense of 3 months in. So it's really important for us to get an understanding from the 7 of you as the representatives of the community, whether or not that's a feasible alternative as we sit here tonight. Happy to have Denise talk us through some of the details.
Sure. So this slide represents our vehicle needs for the 22-23 school year. Determinations for a replacement are based on several factors. First and foremost, safety standards as set forth by the Department of Transportation, which governs our vehicles. And also guidelines within the district according to best practices set forth through the National Association for Pupil Transportation and other. Our transportation department looks at mileage, structural integrity, the age of the vehicle, the availability of parts, a history of breakdowns, to determine the ideal time for retirement. This schedule here, you'll see that we are looking to retire 2 vehicles, one 2006 66 passenger vehicle and a 2009 20 passenger vehicle. I will also mention that this assumes that we are replacing the vehicles that were on our proposition last year. So last year we put out a proposition for 1 electric school bus, 66 passenger, and 2 small minibuses. We received grant funding through NYSERDA for the 66 passenger bus of $120,000. And then we had also applied for the 2 minibuses in the amount of $90,000. We were not granted those funds at that level. So this assumes the purchase of those additional vehicles. And if you look on the lower portion of the schedule, the 66 passenger bus at the bottom, bus 119, that is the bus that we will need to surrender to NYSERDA in order to fulfill the grant application and receive the electric school bus that we've been granted.
forgot to say next slide, that's mine. Okay, so this represents our 5-year vehicle schedule. As you'll see, there's approximately 13 vehicles. We're replacing about 2 to 3 vehicles every year. And this allows us to level the capital cost over time and the impact on our taxpayer and also the tax cap levy itself. So it allows us to stabilize that cost over time. The next slide, this is just a consolidated version of our needs. As you'll see, I'll also point out that this is an extremely conservative schedule that we have here. This was not our original schedule, but we looked at, we're doing some ridership surveys of our students now. Also, we're implementing an enhanced routing schedule, a routing program in our transportation department, and hoping to maybe consolidate some of our routes. So as you can see, we will be needing to replace one school bus, 66 passenger every year for the next 5 years.
Denise, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just go back to the ballot propositions last year. We had the 166 seat, which we were granted NSERDA funds for. With respect to the 2 small, which we were not granted funds for, are we replacing those?
We are replacing those. So the proposition was contingent upon the level of grant funding that we had anticipated, the 90,000. If we did not receive that funding, we were given the authorization to purchase ICE vehicles.
Okay.
ICE being
Internal
Right.
combustion engines, yes.
So these 3 buses are not, like when we start looking at the 22, 23 numbers, these 3 buses have already been taken care of.
The 22, 23 numbers that are up on the screen now,
Yes.
that replacement schedule assumes the purchase of the other 3 vehicles,
Perfect.
the electric school bus and the other.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
And if you weren't clear, probably other people weren't clear. So thank you.
A question on that. So I understand that we're free and clear, we got the NYSERDA grant for the 66 passenger bus last year.
Yes.
We did not meet the requirements for the 2 smaller buses.
Yes.
Is there anything that we can do that would fit within NYSERDA granting that has been approved that would allow us to do more than just the 66 passenger bus?
Possibly. However, we are only under that proposition. We can't do anything.
We can't do it under last year's prior. We would have to have a new proposition to make use of something that we've already been granted.
We weren't granted.
So is there any leftover NYSERDA money?
If there's leftover NYSERDA money, that's what I'm trying to get at. If there's money so if we didn't meet the my question is there anything that we can do to make more efficient use or more complete use of the NYSERDA grant that has been approved, whatever granting has been approved?
So the only official granting that we have received is for the 120,000 for the 66 passenger school bus.
There's no other approved.
Not that we've heard that we were close to receiving the 60, but we've not received any formal notification of that. And that was also about 5 months ago. We
Okay.
don't know if that money has been reallocated to another district.
The 60 for what?
60,000, which
Of the
was during-
$60,000 that would allow us to do one more,
Minibus.
do another minibus, perhaps.
But it wouldn't, because the proposition required.
We would
was
need a new
contingent
proposi-
on the
right.
Was contingent on us getting 90.
Right, we would need to have a new proposition that was contingent on 60.
Right,
Correct.
but the issue on that, as I understand it, the NYSERDA program said diesel vehicles, right?
Right.
And that were from 2006 to 2009, no more recent than that, and with a certain amount of mileage per year or over the life, in the last 5 years, which would mean that as we look at our vehicle replacement, other than the two that are already dealt with in the prior proposition, the only ones that conceivably could fit would be, if we could apply, unless they change the grant formula, would be perhaps the two that we have on tap that you're talking about replacing this year, because it's a 2006 66 passenger Thomas, right? And a 2009 20 passenger Thomas, if we could even get that. And then there's only one other vehicle in this entire replacement schedule that is older than 2009. That's the large bus number 116. So what that says to me, and Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, is that even if we were able to apply for the next round of funding, if we need voter approval, and the universe of vehicles that we could apply, unless and until they change the formula, would be limited to those two vehicles that are up on the screen now at the top, and the one vehicle, bus number 116.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't mean to cut you off
No.
before you answer, but we were not granted that because we don't have routes that.
No, that was that wasn't
different
the route issue wasn't the only issue there. There were other issues that.
It was
led to
the
the
scrappage.
grant
So
application.
initially, the scrappage diesel vehicle that was approved probably close to a year and a half ago, that was approved, was downgraded. So it was approved as an eligible class 4 vehicle for scrappage. It was since downgraded, bringing it to a level 3, therefore only warranting the level 3 funding.
So to
Which was
explain,
the 60,000.
the grants were a level 3 bus would get $60,000.
Right, no, I got that.
Level 4 would get 9, level 5 would get 120. So that's how we kind of got bumped out of that.
Right.
And we're still playing the lottery at that point if we apply for this sort of funding, to be clear.
Let's just, can we let
Yes.
Denise get back to her presentation,
Yeah,
and
I
then,
think
because I know I
that's
think
fine.
probably this and other things we'll have to discuss as we get.
So the next slide is our cost analysis. So this slide represents the cost of the individual unit, our anticipated costs over a 5-year period. I'm going to look at my screen because I can't see that very well. I apologize.
The other one's better.
Yeah, that one is the
I'm good.
better screen.
This one.
So the first line represents our 66 passenger bus, in which we will need 5 minimally over the course of the next 5 years. An ICE vehicle costs approximately $140,000, and an electric comparative is about $360,000, bringing the total cost of to the district to either $700,000 or $1.8 million.
That's for 5. That's not total cost of ownership. That's just the cost of
No,
That's
5.
for
Cost
the
of
cost of
acquisition.
5.
Cost of acquisition for 5 buses.
Correct.
And
Thank you.
also that presumes that the cost for both gas vehicles 2 years from down the road and electric vehicles down the road will be the same as we know now,
Right.
as it is now, and
Right.
those
And these
prices could
numbers
go
are
up or down.
already off the mark a
Can
little
I
bit.
just-
They've gone up since this presentation was done.
Can I just ask you to speak to availability? Are they both equally available?
No, there are availability issues for both.
Okay.
But certainly the electric vehicles, there is a longer lead time for.
How much or? Like what is
Well, for
one?
example,
Yeah.
our bus, we place the official order after grant funding in like the 1st of January. Our bus is slated for manufacturing in late June,
Manufacturing.
yes,
So do you have an anticipated delivery time?
September. Yes.
And then for an ICE vehicle, do you have any guesstimates on that?
There has been a delay in them as well, but we needed to secure the pricing, which is going up considerably every day due to supply chain, et cetera. We had to place a letter of intent to purchase the vehicles upon voter approval. And that will kind of lock in our order in a line of other orders, but I would imagine about 3 to 6 months.
Thank you.
That's for a new vehicle,
Yes.
A new ICE bus.
a brand new off the factory line.
Right.
That's May.
So if we go down this list, the next you'll see the 20 passenger vans. We are in need of 4 of those. The ICE is about 60,000. There is currently no 20 passenger vehicle manufactured in the United States right now that has a comparative EV model. So that is currently not available in EV form. It would be a single wheel chassis, which is allowed to go onto parkways, et cetera, and none of those are available.
So what that means then is that if we wanted to say, let's get 28 passenger vans, which cost more, they're available. But if I understand what you just said, those vans which are used to go distances, right, to go to schools in Lower Westchester, et cetera, could not travel on the Sprain, could not travel on the Bronx River to Sawmill. So we could not use them for those transportation.
No, and they are not traditionally ever in a school bus fleet because of that. The dual chassis vehicles that are available.
I'm sorry, I have a hard time understanding this.
Okay, so then so what you said is for comparison in this chart, that means if we don't have any 28 to 30 passenger vehicles, is that correct?
We do not need any in the upcoming 5
Right.
years.
But if we were, what we need to replace are 20 passengers.
4.
And 4 of them. And if we were to replace them with 28, because they are available as EVs, number one, they're more expensive. Number two, they can't go on parkways.
No, 28s, the 28s that we're receiving can go on parkways.
Okay,
But no 20 passenger vehicles are
Are EVs.
manufactured or eligible in the United States right now.
gotcha. So.
Uh,
Go ahead, Josh.
I'm sorry,
I don't know if
I'm not sure what, I understand which class of vehicle can't go on the parkway.
A dual.
If I can interrupt for 1 second, Denise?
Oh, yeah, I got you, Joe.
So the double axle vehicle is the 28 to 30 passenger that cannot go on the parkway. The 20 passenger vehicle is a single axle and it can go on the parkway. The 20 passengers are the ones that we're looking to replace, 4 of them over the next 5 years.
So Joe, but to make sure we understand, if we were to decide, we have unlimited funds, and so we wanted to buy 28 passenger vehicles, they could not go on parkways.
Yes.
Correct.
That is correct.
Okay. Understood.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Is there any prospect for 20 passenger vehicles coming to the market in the States anytime soon?
I would imagine that they will be, but.
Because
not
I
that
rode
I'm
on
aware.
one in Spain last year.
You did?
Yes,
Oh, well, it may not have been a student transport vehicle. The regulations in.
I know
New
that,
York,
I know that.
uh,
I know that it's, but my point is, I know that it's possible to build one.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And I'm sure they will be coming very soon. Right now, they are not available.
I would just say, and Denise, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that's new information even from when we put this together. In that we were contemplating, would there be an option to replace a current 20-passenger van with an equivalent electric 20-passenger van? That now, because of this information, is off the table in terms of a variable, right? That's not a decision that we are in a position to make because it just simply isn't the availability to purchase one if we wanted.
Got it.
So just for
Unfortunate.
comparison purposes, what this would look like for the average taxpayer with a market value home of approximately $500,000 would be, so the 66-passenger ICE bus would be about $8 a year. The electric, about $20 a year. Over the lifetime of the van, the bond anticipation note, which is the financing tool we use to purchase them, it would be $40 for the ICE and $100 for the electric. So it's about a 2.5 to 1 ratio. For every one electric school bus, we could purchase about 2.5 ICE vehicles. For the 28 to 30 passenger van, it's $4 a year compared to $15. So as you can see, that's a much greater disparity. It's almost 4 to 1. So for every 2 electric minibuses, we can purchase a little over 7 ICE vehicles. And then what I did do is a comparison on the last line, which, so if we did reapply for the $60,000 grant, that would bring the vehicle cost down from $275,000 to $210,000, which is considerably higher than the $75,000 cost of that vehicle under the in an ICE form. That would cost the taxpayer $4 a year compared to $12 or $20 compared to $60. Questions? I see.
So this is the cost of acquisition.
Cost of acquisition and the cost of financing to the taxpayer.
Correct, correct. So it doesn't include the costs or savings of ownership over time, right?
It's
Because
not the ROI, no.
is there any way, because when I was trying to figure this out, trying to do this research, numbers I found ranged from as low as 7,000 and as high as 50 a year in terms of savings from electric vehicles, switching from a combustion to electric. It's somewhere in the middle, right? It has to be somewhere in the middle. Any sense from what you've looked at?
Because of the high purchase price, because of the high upfront cost, the ROI is very low. And because of the mileage that we travel within the district, it brings the return on investment to between 10 and 14 years.
So that would be like the break-even point.
Mm-hmm.
10 to 14. And the life, sorry,
No,
the life expectancy of, or the useful life of a bus.
No one really knows yet, because I don't think they've been around for that long, especially in the Northeast, where the chassis and the frame of the vehicle is exactly identical to our existing school buses, which generally deteriorate over time.
Yeah.
So, you know.
And then as far as the electric vehicles, the battery life expectancy is about 10 years. So at that point, they'd probably have to be replaced.
And what about, Denise, is there an estimate as the cost to how we have to change our current bus depot?
Yes, there are certainly infrastructure costs related that can be significant.
Do we have any insight into that?
We do have a bit of an acreage deficit at the transportation garage.
And a lot of bedrock.
Right, and a lot of.
Do they
yes.
require to be in, are they required to be inside or covered or?
No, ideally they would be inside because the batteries should be kept warm in order, or warmed in order to run in cold temperatures. There's not a lot of history in the Northeast in cold temperatures. So there are maneuverability issues as far as charging them. Our intent is to go forward with level 2 chargers initially because we definitely do not have the electrical capacity at the transportation garage right now. So we'll go with level 2 chargers, but ideally we would want level 3 chargers, which would allow us to charge intermittently throughout the day. But right now our transformer could not handle that load. So it is.
We've
it
been
is-
talking to Con Ed.
we have been in conversation with Con Ed and other suppliers. We are working on it with our building condition survey and 5-year plan. As many consultants as we can. There's a lot of opportunity out there for funding with charging stations. But in order for that to occur, we would need to make them available to local individuals. And that would be an issue in that we would need to secure the yard. So some of those funding opportunities are limited. I'm hoping that once the budget is ratified and ideally there's some grant funding.
The budget, not our budget, you mean?
Not
The
our
New York State
budget.
budget, yes. That there will be ample funding opportunities out.
Too bad we
there
can't
Do you
wait
have-
till
we could
April 1.
participate in.
Any information regarding the infrastructure costs involved in moving forward?
The infrastructure costs could be greater than the actual acquisition costs.
So that's double what is already double.
But again, this is a process. We are at the forefront. Less than 1% of buses in the United States are electric. So we are part of that less than 1%. And that is in the Northeast, probably 1/1000%. So we are forging the trail. We will likely need some added support with regard to the infrastructure. It's going to be a process. We will be prepared for our electric bus when it arrives with a level 2 charger. And moving forward, our goal is to have substantial, at least 3 to 5 level 3 chargers in the district.
At various places in the district, at the district
Yes.
office, schools, et cetera.
Yes. The fortunate thing is that our supplier, the manufacturer of our electric school bus that we'll be receiving in September, is building a very large sales and service center in Yorktown Heights. They'll have a 6-bay garage with servicemen and ample charging available for if our vehicle breaks down, we need assistance service. They are right around the corner, which is a huge relief to us, bringing this new vehicle into the district. So it's a cultural shift. It's an infrastructure change. It involves every aspect of what we do. Yes.
I have a question that's actually not about electric buses. My question is actually about how we go about acquiring given that we went to this analysis, there is no 20-passenger van available for us. If we're going to buy an internal combustion engine passenger van, how long an investment do we want to make? Do we want to make an investment in something that's going to be around for 10 years? Or do we want to invest in something that's going to be around for 5 years so that under the understanding that we would replace it with an electric vehicle when they're available?
You suggesting buying something used or
The-
leasing?
I am
something?
suggesting either leasing or use, I mean, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with investing 10-year, in a 10-year investment in an internal combustion engine vehicle, especially when the state is making noises about wanting to eventually eliminate the use of these buses. It doesn't seem like a good investment to me over 10 years. Seems like a good investment, perhaps. Seems like an okay investment, not a great investment. Seems like an okay investment over a shorter period of time. I'm not sure that it's a good 10-year investment. That's my concern.
What about, I don't know if Denise, I know you know a lot about this clearly. With respect to the technology and how that's developing, I mean, it's changing every day. I mean, to your point, I don't know that we should load up on a fleet of 2022 electric buses if in 2025 the technology is going to be so much more efficient and the cost by then will probably be less and the charging will be different and we'll have more information regarding what they're very good at and maybe what they're not very good at. The same with respect to ICE buses. We know that they're very bad at polluting the environment but very good at running on cold winter days and getting our students to school. So
right.
I think that all of that is changing with respect to that.
Yeah, it's clearly a difficult decision. I mean, it's given that we're going to have an electric bus in September. I'm wondering if there's a way that you can track the cost of that bus in relation to other buses.
Absolutely.
So that by this time next year,
Mhm.
we'd have a better idea of how it's impacting both operationally and financially the district. And what's giving me pause is Governor Hochul committed to she said by 2027 having all buses be all new bus purchases be
All new
electric.
bus purchases.
Yeah, and then by 2035 the whole fleet will be, or the whole state fleet will be electric. So with that kind of commitment, I would imagine there's going to be significant state funding to support that drive.
You would hope.
I would hope.
I mean,
That's
yes,
what we're banking on.
right? So given all that, and to your point, Mr. Walker, about surveying the community, do you want to bear the cost of being the district that's kind of charting new territory here? Given all that's happening in the near future, whether again it's leasing, buying used, or whatever other alternatives are out there.
A reaction to what Omar said. It seems to me from everything that I've heard that the landscape is changing, but I'm not so confident that the landscape in terms of funding and resources is going to change as dramatically as Governor Hochul said, or even as President Biden said he would like to see in the near future. So that's point number one. Point number two is years ago, we used to buy used buses from HenHUD. Because HenHUD had a vehicle replacement schedule. So they said after 5 or 6 years, we buy new buses. And we got these old buses and we can get 5 years out of it. And we bought them for very cheap prices. We're able to run them for 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. And that was very effective for us. I don't think that's going to be the situation now because I imagine that many districts, if not every district, is going to be having this same conversation on their boards and with their budget directors now or in the next few years. So that the market for used vehicles, I don't think is really going to be there. But those districts, if we go forward and if we kind of get the plan in place to be able to take advantage of opportunities, whether it's by grant funding or decreases in the cost of electric vehicles or the manufacturer of 20 passenger vehicles that we need. And then we will be able to be a seller instead of a buyer, because there'll be other districts to sell to other districts, because other districts are not moving as quickly, and they're going to be facing that same vehicle replacement issue and may be glad to purchase from us.
Purchase our used electric vehicles?
No, I use
No,
gas
used
vehicles,
gas
or
vehicles.
diesel-
I see.
diesel vehicles, as we move towards, as we electrify our fleet. But
And our vehicles are highly sought out because of the quality of care that they
that we
receive.
provide, right?
Except
So-
for the funding, except for the granting is based on scrappage.
No, but that's now.
Yeah,
That's
true.
not
Yeah.
2 years from now.
Okay,
Right? I'm talking about, we don't know. We don't know the landscape in terms of the physical, the cost of buses. We don't know the landscape in terms of funding. We don't know the landscape in terms of availability of fast charging stations, so that when our buses have to take kids down to the Bronx or to Lower Westchester, whether they're gonna have it, all of that's gonna change. But we, as Denise said, it's a process. What I would like to see, and I think as I look at this and think about what we've discussed over the years, when I was last year on the bus electrification task force, and what we discussed last year with regard to our propositions, is putting us in a position to take advantage when it is time and when we have the ability to take advantage. Okay, one of the things I know you talked about is our large vehicles do our local runs, our 66 passenger. They have much fewer, in average, much fewer miles, which creates an issue. But they also are polluting, if you will, in our community, a different way than it happens on a highway, both because of efficiency of, stop and start, as opposed, and the nature of what that travel is. But the bottom line of it is, as I look at what the entirety of the presentation, I know you haven't gotten to the last page, is thinking about how we can do something to get our kids to school when we need to get into school now, to purchase used vehicles if they're out there, and if our mechanics are willing to certify that they'll last, but I don't think there's going to be a lot out there now. If there is, great. We don't have a repository like we used to have, of HenHUD just willing to sell stuff that's real cheap. And being able to say, when it's time, or when we have the ability, when prices come down, to take advantage, this district take advantage as expeditiously as possible through, among other things, the reserve that that you'll be talking about. But the last thing is, I think, and this goes to something that superintendent asked at the very beginning of this, is what is the community sentiment? How important is this to the community? And the way I look at it, twofold. The community spoke pretty strongly in approving all 4 of those resolutions that were done last year.
As pilots.
As pilots, but they
As
spoke,
pilots.
this is something that we want to do, notwithstanding that there would be additional cost to the taxpayers. Okay? Even pilots, and even with the grants that we hoped to get and did not. So I think but I also note that we're talking here about a community where 70% of our families, of our taxpayers, do not have students in the school. And I know, and I may be channeling Iris now, we have to be very concerned about, the fiscal impact of what we do on all of our taxpayers, including those of limited means and those who are who are elderly, whatever. We want to keep this community as a vibrant, eclectic, whatever word you want to use, community. So putting all that together, I think we can, we can start on this project. We can start on this initiative, but we cannot go any faster than it is fiscally and operationally and otherwise possible, given what's out there to buy. And so that's how I look at all of this as we go through the remainder. But I will say that the column in the chart that you showed, estimated total cost, right, total cost means for 5 years, really is not to my mind, a meaningful point to raise, because we just don't know where any of those things are going to be. You said the price of vehicles, whether they're gas or internal combustion, which, by the way, you should say gas, because they might be gas, they might be diesel on the chart. But that's going to change. It's already changing both ways. And so I don't want to, I don't think we should be saying to the community, that's what the cost is, even estimated 5 years, because it's such an unknown.
Well, I think the estimated 5-year cost, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the 5-year financing of that ban. So that is the current cost. And that is the calculated cost to the taxpayer over 5 years of that financing.
No, what that's saying, estimated total cost, 5 vehicles is 5 times 140,000.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the 5-year total cost to taxpayer, the second chart below. So the top table is, yes, is on current pricing, what five vehicles.
Right, and that
what
doesn't make any sense, because we have no idea what prices are going to be 6 months from now, or 6 weeks from now, much less.
Well, I think it's just it's an illustration, like in today's numbers,
Yeah,
that's what this would be.
I just don't want to. I don't want us to be in a situation where we're putting numbers out there and somebody can shoot holes in it, sort of like what I did. If it's really not, but that's
Right.
That's my 2.5 cents.
These were just present day
I understand.
estimations.
I was just gonna ask you if we can get to the recommendations.
Okay, we're moving.
Thank you. So that I can figure out what we're doing.
So this
Okay.
slide is substantially similar to what we saw on Saturday, modified only in that it reflects the 22-23 school year, not any longer than that. And as I said earlier, it was also based on the premise that there was potentially an appetite from the community to continue to electrify the fleet each year going forward. So in my mind, the most important long-term recommendation there is the establishment of the capital reserve. And to Neil's point about preparation for the future, again, regardless of the vehicle, the type of vehicle purchasing, but particularly for the potential of future ESB or EV purchasing, the capital reserve makes sense to me as something we would want to consider asking the community to approve through a proposition this year. Bullets 2 and 3, again, are based on that premise that if there was an appetite to electrify the fleet in some way, that the 66 passenger in our mind continues to make sense as the direction short term to go. And that was rendered moot by the finding that there's no opportunity to electrify the 20 passenger anyway. So of those 3, the most important recommendation on my end is the establishment of the capital reserve.
So why a capital reserve? The reserve will be funded through excess revenue in each fiscal year. What that would allow is for debt-free purchasing. So we would not need to finance those purchases. Also, there's no future tax implications. Why 66 passenger bus? The lack of availability of the 20 passenger, the huge disparity in costs between the smaller vehicles and the larger. We feel it would have the greatest impact carbon footprint wise per mile, transports more of our students daily. So the larger buses don't leave the district. They are transporting 66 passenger students traveling throughout our community every single day. So we feel it would have the greatest impact locally. Balances our commitment to environmental sustainability along with fiscal responsibility, in addition to all of the other measures that we are doing as a school district to preserve our environment. And adaptable to the changing financial and funding and technology landscape, which is changing faster than we can keep up with. Next.
So just in thinking about then how to like move forward in terms of our discussion and decision making tonight, it really comes down to, I think, 4 questions. One is from a proposition standpoint with regard to a ban, how is it that we want to move forward in terms of replacing the 66 passenger and the 20 passenger? I think it's pretty well established the 20 passenger vehicle is going to be an ICE vehicle, new or used. The 66 passenger, you're trying to synthesize what I'm hearing from the board, that it may make sense to have that also anticipated to be an internal combustion engine purchase, with the concept that we could utilize the electric vehicle that will be arriving on site in September as a way to pilot what that looks like and do some evaluation around how what kind of impact that has on our ability to maintain it, and what kind of potential return on investment in the short term we can begin to glean from that. Of course, also a question around, do we want to, if we were going to do an EV and an ICE vehicle, would we want those to be combined in one proposition or separate propositions? Either way, whether they're both ICE purchases or one EV and one ICE purchase, our recommendation is to do it in one combined proposition. To have a proposition to establish a capital reserve, again, for purposes of future, or defraying the cost of future purchasing, and to follow up on a request and a conversation we had briefly on Saturday, led by Omar, that concept potentially of a repair reserve. There was interest there to establish that.
Then Josh, then you.
So I have one additional question before I kind of tell you where I think about all this. Have we looked at hybrid options?
We have already several hybrids in the district. The impact on our carbon footprint as far as greenhouse gases is significantly less, yet the price point is still very high. I don't have any quotes on this vehicle. Joe, do you have any hybrid quotes on the 20 passenger?
No, I do not.
Something to consider. With respect to my perspective on the vote and the proposition last year, I think that I, as a voter and as, you know, a potential school board member at the time, was thinking that that was an opportunity for us to take advantage of NYSERDA funds to pilot a 66 passenger bus, to take advantage of funding available for chargers. I didn't, when I made my vote, sign up to pay more than double for 66 passenger buses going forward without first having a 66 passenger electric vehicle in district and seeing what that looks like for our students and for our transportation director and for infrastructure costs related to continuing to develop a plan to purchase 66 passenger buses exclusively as electric vehicles. So that's just my perspective in terms of reading the community. And I've had conversations with people, and that's kind of what my understanding of that voting process was. With respect to the analysis, the cost analysis needs, I do think that the infrastructure cost related to that is very relevant because it's all coming up from the same pot of money. Am I wrong on that? Yeah, so I would love to see the 66 passenger vehicle that we have coming. To Omar's point, I would love to see like really good data on how it's working and how what it's costing us and how it's running and how it maneuvers around our little narrow village roads, getting our most important students to school. And then I would also just, to Iris's point, generally speaking,
Oh, okay.
not with respect to this. I do think that there's a fiscal responsibility right now. We're looking at crazy increases in cost across the board, inflation. There's certainly a lot of instability with respect to different markets and global markets as a whole. So those are my thoughts.
Josh.
So I've been rolling this around in my head for quite some time. And to be honest, I am very disappointed that as a nation, we are behind the world in this regard, significantly behind the world in this regard. But there's not much that I can do about that. I do feel that the time to invest in diesel vehicles is ending. I don't just think that it's bad for the environment. I think it's just a bad investment from a purely investment point of view. I don't think we're going to be able to sell those things when it's time to get rid of them. I think that 5 years from now, the value is going to be zero or near zero. Nobody's going to want to buy those around here. And I think we really need to think about that. I think that it makes sense to go ahead with, it's not ideal, but I think it makes sense to go ahead and say, we should seek funding to purchase the 66 passenger EV. 20 passenger, I think we're stuck with an ICE vehicle, it seems. But I just can't see spending money on a diesel burner. I find it just strikes me as environmentally irresponsible, and it strikes me actually long-term as fiscally irresponsible. Short-term, perhaps in the short-term first year, yes, it's going to be a hit upfront. It's a hit. Long-term, I still think it's better. When you start factoring fuel costs, if anybody thinks the fuel costs are going to go down to where they were before, they're smoking dope. Fuel costs are going to continue to go up. We are past peak oil. And I don't think that we're going to start seeing Russian oil flood back into the market anytime soon. It's not going to happen. Oil prices are going to stay high. We need to look for alternative fuels, which right now means electrification.
Before, I just wanted quick question for him. Does anyone have any other questions for Denise, Joe, Steve, before we get into sort of our individual thoughts on
I have
this?
one question which I was going to ask before I give an opinion, but I'll ask it as a question first, which is looking at our replacement needs, right? On the first slide, the 66 passenger bus is 16 years old. I know we have in past years deferred purchases. We did that 2 years ago, right? And my question really is, given the lead time for getting on the order bank for an EV at full price, because I have no sense that we would get any grant, notwithstanding Josh's hope, any grant funding towards that. Unless things change, which we don't know about, we would consider that order to replace bus number 115, 2006, 66 passenger bus, would probably not be filled for another year, right? So is that bus, Joe probably knows this better anyway, in a condition
No.
that it can, so you're stuck with another situation. If bus number 115 goes to scrap or goes to become a vehicle for
Scrap without the S, right?
scrap without the S, how do we meet the transportation needs that vehicle provides? And it might be lease. It
Lease
might be,
leasing comes out of our general operating budget.
so
it would
what
be-
is the annual, what would the, if we're gonna lease a bus for a year, because that one dies, what's the cost approximately?
Probably more now, anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000 a
Okay.
year.
So
to-
what would
pay
happen
for a
there
vehicle that we
is
don't own.
it dies, right? And until we get a new one, we're leasing. And we're gonna have to find that $20,000 or $30,000 out of the operating budget by, tightening our belts, even at the beginning, as we've already been talking about this budget, which is obviously substantially below the level of inflation. So if we don't, and I guess my flip side is question, if we were to establish a reserve and we did not, and then we had a ban that sought the borrowing of $100,000 or $140,000 for a bus. And we as a board, a year, 2 years, whenever this question comes up, says, we have enough money in our transportation reserve that we've established to put the $140,000 we borrowed and whatever we need to take out of the reserve to buy an EV. Is that legally permissible? And I see you nodding, so the answer is yes.
They would have to be approved by the voters. 'cause
Approved by the voters. But so in that situation, by establishing the transportation reserve and stating as a philosophy, but we want to move as expeditiously as reasonably possible, we can use a combination of band funding and additional monies if the board approves and then the voters approve to buy an EV. And that would also be true, presumably, for the smaller vehicles, if they start making 20-passenger vehicles and if the price comes to an affordable level. So when I talked before about being able to move forward, but with the flexibility to respond quickly or expeditiously, that's how, and I'm now getting away from questions and into my thoughts, is that's how I think we manage our transition to an electric fleet over time with the, keeping the taxpayer in mind. I also think that it is possible that 2 years from now, there will be much more funding for electric vehicles. Prices will go down. And then we'll be in a position to, we don't know that now, and I can't be a soothsayer. So that's my feelings about it. So I guess the only other question I had is the capital reserve that is recommended is a capital reserve for transportation vehicles
And
and infrastructure, but not electric transportation vehicles, but transportation vehicles,
Correct.
so that we can mix, match, and I think that's important because I wouldn't want to, set up a reserve for EV only, and then we can never use it.
I do have just a clarifying question on that. On the capital reserve, do you set that up for a certain amount of money? Then?
Yes.
And is that based on those estimates? Like, so do we need to know about whether they're ICE or EVs?
No.
In the future to set up the amount of money that would cover all of this?
No, the board would establish the capital reserve in a particular amount. So for our last two capital reserves, it was established at $5 million. We could establish this reserve at $2 million to start, and it can also be increased over time. So we have to weigh that in with the other propositions on our ballot. So the board would need to determine what level they would like to establish for this capital reserve if they choose to go, if you choose to go forward.
There's one question. You say that can be increased over time as we've done by establishing a second capital reserve for transportation, the way we establish a
Right.
second capital reserve for. Okay.
Denise, first, with respect to the capital reserve, I guess I'm not exactly clear why we wouldn't have it for electric vehicles. Because unless we're we generally go out every year, if it's an ICE vehicle, what benefit does setting up a capital reserve if we're gonna continue to purchase ICE vehicle? I thought it was because the added cost of electric vehicles, we wanted to have a funding source for it.
Right. The intent of the reserve would be for electric vehicles. But when establishing reserve, you want to be as broad as you can. Because what happens if we go out and we find out that the infrastructure alone is going to cost $2 million? The board could at that point say, we would like to vote to utilize the entire reserve or $2 million of the reserve solely for infrastructure. But we need to be broad enough in the establishment of the reserve that it can respond to changes. What if there's a new vehicle out that's called something other than an electric vehicle? If we were not broad enough, it would prohibit us from engaging in that. So the intent, at least as I understand it, would be to finance the electric vehicles through the capital reserve. But it could also serve as a measure to not finance other vehicles.
So I guess so the thought would be we would no longer do bonds for buses on the annual vote.
I would say that we would not be at that point because, again, we are just establishing the reserve.
Right.
This reserve has to be funded, and then it needs to be voted on by the public in order to expend it.
Right.
So that is a year process. So I cannot imagine that we would be anywhere in the immediate future at a point in which it was funded enough to support all of our transportation needs.
So
Especially
we might
with
be
the
doing
current
both.
price.
We might be
So we
having
might be
bond
Just like we-
votes, bus bond votes, as well as capital
reserve.
You use some money out of
However, the
reserve.
capital reserve will have no taxpayer impact.
Right, so I'll give my opinion on that in a little bit, then the next thing is the cost of ownership. I guess I just need a clarification because there's always this conversation about over the long term, the payback cost is greater with the electric vehicles. But that savings, how does the taxpayer get that savings? If you don't understand my question. Because cost of ownership, I understand. If I have to go buy a car, I'm paying out money to purchase it. And my understanding from your chart, the numbers on the bottom represent the purchase price and what the taxpayer has to pay for that purchase price. Over 10 years, the taxpayer receives the benefit of the electric vehicle. But where does that cost come into payback to the taxpayer? Does the taxpayer receive money back?
Not taxpayer, but.
You understand?
No.
This is,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, but-
let me finish,
Sorry.
please, because this is my concern. Every year, as everyone here knows, our budget goes up. We go up to whatever the tax levy cap is or close to it. So if there is a savings, it's going to be wrapped into that budget. But the increased cost payment, the taxpayer is going to still continue to be making payments on. So for me, I just want to know if I'm understanding that correctly, or am I missing the boat there?
Well,
It would reduce our operating costs, so the cost that we wouldn't be spending on fuel
Right.
would be able to accomplish another goal. of the budget.
So,
Correct.
yeah, so it's sort
But
of
the
like,
taxpayer won't be seeing that
well, but
because you're not going to
You'll be
reduce
seeing
the
it in
budget.
less of an increase than would have been had we
or,
not.
or,
But will
or
we not increase the budget?
Right.
That's my question.
no,
They're gonna be
No,
seeing
but-
it in terms
but-
of better education.
no, but it's sort of like you buy a new high energy boiler for your house.
Yes,
And you spend, $10,000, but your cost of fuel, be it electric, gas, oil, whatever, is halved,
yes,
right?
yes.
You have to borrow money perhaps to pay for that boiler, but you're spending less for the energy,
yes.
right? So you might be able to calculate that if it's oil, if it's electricity, you might not, but that's where the savings is. There is probably, with the energy performance contract that we entered into, we've had a denomination by our contractor, by Honeywell, I think it is,
Yeah.
of what our annual savings are gonna be because of all of the lighting and all the other good stuff they've done.
Yeah.
So that is something that they, because they're the experts in that area, can calculate. And they
But
do.
my question.
You're
is,
saying, where does
As
that,
the taxpayer, when you come to me and you say, we're going to bond for a $300,000 vehicle. Right? I have to pay $20 more per year
Mhm,
in my taxes for that.
mhm.
Your savings that you receive from that electric vehicle is not going to turn key back to me as taxpayer. Because when you build your budget for the next year, you're going to take that savings, you're going to put it in, and you're still going to increase the budget.
But instead of it going up by 1.98%, it will go up by 1.96%.
If-
Will it?
I'm not
Will it?
sure of that.
Because
If you
every year we
decide.
go to the levy.
Right.
Will
You
it?
have to keep those numbers.
If you're going to then say to me, okay, we made the savings in the electric vehicle, and we're gonna put it into the tax cap levy, and we're gonna reduce it, then I say, it makes a difference, that cost. But otherwise, if that levy is still gonna continue to grow, and we're gonna still continue to go to the maximum, it is really just the cost of purchase that the taxpayer is paying the increase on, to me.
Yes,
Now, the commitment to electric vehicle to me therefore cannot circle around the cost only. It has to be the commitment to, we want to do what we believe will be better for the environment.
Mhm.
So for me, the cost, the conversation about cost, I think we can if we strip it away and we just, for me, just say plainly, this is what it's gonna cost. If you're in favor of it, then this is what we do. This is what we're going to do as, taxpayer, this is what's gonna cost to you. Because to me, tying those two other conversations confuses it. It makes it less transparent for me. So I just wanted to make sure I understood, because generally the philosophy is you go to the levy. So that savings is we'll be able to do more. But it's not really the taxpayer will be paying less.
I appreciate what you're saying. I understand what you're saying.
Mhm.
At first I didn't, but I got it.
So it's gotta be a commitment.
But it's not that black and white, because this fund is not just for electric vehicles, it's
No,
for.
no, I'm
Yeah.
talking about the,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Anna, I
Yes,
wasn't talking about the
so
fund.
EVs
I'm
versus
talking
ICE.
because the conversation of cost of ownership versus
Right.
thing, it kind of confused me last year to the point where I did not, in that year, feeling like I had a clear understanding that there was a true savings. And now I understand why I had that concern, because we go to a levy.
yeah. The way I understand your question, and let me give you this analogy, maybe it'll help. But using Neil's example, I buy a high energy efficient boiler that has a greater initial outlay,
Mhm.
right? What that'll result down the road is I I have more disposable income now because my monthly cost of paying for fuel is less.
Yes,
So now I can take that extra money that I have every month and buy other things with it.
yes.
And as it relates to the school budget, potentially go through it at programming, athletics, what have you. And I
Yes.
think that is how, while it won't be translated to a savings to the tax base, it will be a savings to the district where resources then can be redistributed to other areas. And that's why, when I said before, the tax levy will go up, but not at the rate that it would have had we not generated those monthly savings.
Or we would have had less program, we would have had some.
Right.
less
Yeah.
program.
Yes, yes,
Right.
which segues into
But
my
Iris's
question.
budget does always go up.
Yes.
Yeah, it's gonna always go,
Right.
yes, it's always gonna go.
They're saying it's being put towards the programs.
Correct, that's to me working.
So kind of going to my question about this, a couple, well, a point and a question. When we say we're gonna establish a transportation reserve, what that tells me is that transportation is taking precedence over any other capital need that we have, or is so important that it is taking a front seat to other capital requirements that we have. Given that we still have field costs that are coming up, capital construction costs that are coming up, can we rephrase that reserve to say something, and at the risk of wordsmithing, but I think I want to try to keep it broad enough to say something to the effect of, establish a capital reserve to fund either future carbon reduction or future environmental initiatives, where it can include, and we can even say including the actual electrification and all infrastructure related to that. Because if we have an opportunity to, more efficient lights, that will help achieve the goal of reducing this district's carbon footprint, improving efficiencies in its operations, why wouldn't we want to couple that together?
I don't think New York finance law would,
allow that?
I don't. I think that it will be established as a capital reserve for the purchase of capital investments within our transportation vehicles and or infrastructure. So it is a capital reserve similar to our other capital reserves that are potentially available for some of those very important capital enhancements that you just spoke about.
I would add a couple of things. Well, first is many years ago, when I first came on board, I always say that, we bought all our buses out of the operating budget.
Yeah.
Okay, cash on the barrel hit, so to speak. Then over time and over the objections of some board members who didn't like that idea, we started financing. And so that now we are using bands. If you think about our use of capital reserves in 2013 to 2016, with voter approval, we use those monies in the same way as we're talking about here. We've got a pot of money and we need it for repairs, right? And so we're saying, rather than bonding that, whether it's by a ban or by a long-term borrowing, we are going to use the money from the capital reserve. So it's on a, it's a different part of our operation, but it operates the same way as our 2013 and 2016 capital reserve. The other point that I would make is that we have, through our energy performance contracts and the those kinds of arrangements, have dealt with and will continue, I presume, to deal with a lot of the sustainability, environmentally related infrastructure needs of the district. And so if we even could phrase it such as you're talking about, I am afraid, as I said before, by being too narrow, we might establish a reserve that we can't use because we're not going to have the need.
Yeah, the idea is to broaden it.
Right, but it doesn't broaden it if you can't do it, and it doesn't broaden it if you broaden it to say things that somehow relate to sustainability and relate to environmental, right? And then we don't have those, we don't have to spend money for that. And therefore, we are kind of, we got the money stuck because a reserve can only last for 10 years, and then it's got to dissipate. It's got to go back into monies that are
It's not-
left at the
yeah, it's
end of
not
the,
that
there's
straightforward,
issues
but-
in finance law that, I
Yeah, it
don't,
doesn't say what happens if it goes unused.
yeah, but there is something, and I don't think it's good.
It can't, you can't change the terms of it or add additional funding
Okay.
to it.
But I think the other point to it is that, as I see it, we've been pretty good in utilizing those outside resources, energy performance contracts and, monies to deal with other environmental issues. And I don't, number one, I think if we're making a commitment, albeit with the spirit to move towards electric vehicles, to water down, if you will, I call it water down, you call it broaden the proposition in a way that makes that less understandable and appreciated by the community. If the community is interested in moving towards electric vehicles, will not help us as a board or as a community. So that's kind of how I see it, but I think, probably can't even do it, as you say.
Well, and I think, to your point, though, that prioritizing, that we would be prioritizing transportation by setting this capital over other things. We've got the building condition survey coming up in the next year. So we're going to be looking at and addressing some of those capital needs within that. But the reality is transportation is a need, and it will be, it's not a need that's going to go away, right? We have a responsibility to transport our students safely, and we will always have that responsibility. So if we can set something up that allows us to responsibly make that transition and begin to make that transition to electric vehicles, I think that makes it, it's a responsible way to do that for our taxpayers, but also for the district in providing us some more flexibility there.
And I would just add that, again, this is just the establishment of the reserve. The voters will need to approve what we've identified for purchase when that time comes.
No, I'm sorry, do you have a question?
I have
More
one more
questions?
question.
No,
Sorry.
Go ahead,
about-
Omar.
Yeah, about,
Sorry.
no, that's okay.
One more. So if we are proposing to fund the reserve from that fund balance or remaining fund balance. When the community asks, well, let's say it's $500,000, right? Projected for this year is about $500,000. Sorry, yeah, 500, that's $500,000. If this community says, well, why don't you take that money and get the part-time assistant, because that's probably one time, use it for one-time instructional costs, or create a new after-school program. What's the response to that question?
Can I give a response? 15 years ago.
No.
Too late. Just give the response.
We tried it 13 years ago when we had leftover funds and we said, you know what? We got this money. Let's just redo the track. And we got major community blowback because we can't do that, even though that's a one-off, not a continuing expense like you thought, or your expense like you talked about. But the answer is, if you're not going to put it in a reserve, you have to lower the tax levy in August and just basically say less taxes. And then what happens next year is you're at a lower levy for all of our work going forward. I think I may have said what you were going to say, but
Denise, how does establishing this reserve fall into play with respect to our retiring debt? You talked to us about that earlier in the budget process, or does this not?
It would not impact that.
But would it? Oh, because that's not debt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would the reduction over time of transportation bans
Over
affect
time,
our debt?
it could reduce our debt because we would not need to finance the cost of vehicles if we were to pay for them out of the capital reserve. Was that your question?
But it
So
could,
yes,
but if electric vehicles cost more, we're still, as I described the way to proceed, you're still gonna have some debt. You still manage how much you borrow
right.
and use the rest out of the capital.
Mhm.
And so we can still go through that debt manage, that debt management fund exercise for
So
purpose.
So just to make sure I'm clear on your recommendations, there's capital reserve, but the other two, the 66 and the 20 vehicle, that's a ban for this year.
That's a ban.
So that would be a ban, that's outside. So the capital reserve, from what I understand, is for 23, 24 forward, right? So it's a 4-year.
We could not purchase out of, first of all, we haven't funded any of the reserve. We have to make sure that at the end of the year, we would have the funds, and then we would need to wait a year in order to utilize it.
And so you said the voters have to vote on establishing the fund, and then they have to vote to approve what to buy. Is that at the annual vote that they vote for that, or is that a separate vote during the year?
It could be at the annual vote or a separate vote.
Okay. And then how much is this capital reserve that you're
That
talking
would
about?
have to be established by the board.
Do you have a recommendation?
I mean, wouldn't that be based on what our needs are for the next 4 years?
Not necessarily,
And why not?
because our needs are really unknown at this time.
And you can ban the difference.
Yeah, our needs are really unknown at this time. So Steve and I talked about it a little bit. We were going between $2 and $3 million.
Yeah, my recommendation would be $2 million. There's no science behind that, but that feels to me like something we can message to the community. And just to follow up on a point Omar made earlier, that concept of kind of surveying the community. To me, that's part of what this does, is it's a statement of direction. And then it gives the community an opportunity to say, we support the direction, or we don't love this direction. And it's a lower impact decision than voting yes or no on a bus, which creates other problems for us.
And then, sorry, there also is going to be a capital reserve for the other projects that we're talking about, the turf field. And the other capital.
So that would be in
projects.
this coming year,
That'll be-
that's not a cap, that would be part of the building condition survey, which we might then put together a capital project for, but that would be.
That wouldn't be a capital reserve. That
It
would
could be.
Uh-huh.
We
Probably
could
a
we
capital
could use
reserve and a
capital
bond.
reserve money,
Yeah.
and we could borrow
Yeah.
the long-term bonds.
Do a special vote on that in September?
We would have to.
Right, I guess I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
there-
yeah,
there could be
I
another-
wasn't saying that it was necessarily gonna be like a
Okay,
whole year
that's
from now, but
right.
it's not in this.
But there's gonna be a need to go to the community with another capital reserve.
Not
Not necessarily a
reserve.
capital reserve, it could be it could be a bond, or it
A
could
bond,
be a
a-
capital
a-
reserve.
Right.
Give
Of
us the
multiple
right
millions
to
of
borrow
dollars,
multiple,
probably,
yes,
right?
bonds.
Significantly larger.
Yeah.
It's like 5 million, right?
Or-
Well, given some of the things that we know.
The
are likely
last,
to be in
the
there.
last bond project that we did was what?
20.
Oh, yeah, that's right, 20.8.
20.8.
Yeah.
And then the one before
Yeah,
that.
they told me to wouldn't ask again.
No, we're not
I don't
asking.
remember that.
We're
not asking you, that's all right.
Oh, So Stephen, you're recommending $2 million. Where's that money gonna come from? So we'll say, yes, let's establish, we all agree this hypothetically. to
We've
establish
opened a
$2
bank,
million
it means
reserve.
we've opened a bank account. We haven't put any money in it
Where
yet,
we
we just
gonna
opened the
have
bank
the
account.
When, at the end of the
That's
year,
right.
when there's unexpended funds that go beyond the 4% unrestricted fund balance,
Mhm.
we say, all right.
Okay.
We'll take, as we do in June with all of our things, we're gonna put this much in the unemployment reserve.
Yeah.
This much in the legal liability
Okay.
reserve, and we're gonna put this much into the
So-
transportation, and then the year after, we put more in.
Sure, so next year,
Mhm.
with the condition survey, the building condition survey is done, and we come up with another $20 million bill, we can then decide to say, even though we established this transportation reserve,
Mhm.
this takes precedence, and we're gonna put more money in the building than,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, so
Sometimes
then-
at that
then-
time.
that's fine, that's great.
Yeah, there's no responsibility or
To
or
fund it.
obligation to fund at any level or at
Right.
any schedule. It's just,
Okay.
you can put no more than $2 million in that bank account. When you've got the money to put it in, you put it.
And then when you want to spend that
If you
money,
don't,
you have to go to
you have to
the, you have to go to the
If you
voters.
don't have any money to put in, you don't put any money in.
At our June meeting, the board will vote on what they're going to put forth to the capital reserves. What we do traditionally, because again, we're estimating our fund balance, we'll do a not to exceed amount. So you may say, we will put $100,000 into the the capital reserve 2022. We will put such and such into the TRS reserve, et cetera.
Now, I had a quick question just with regard to, given that we don't anticipate that we would be eligible necessarily for the current NYSERDA funding, but that there are other funding mechanisms coming out, like the EPA is coming out with theirs sometime at the end of April when they've finalized the details of it, as to what that rebate program will be. Obviously, there's mismatches in timing with that at the state level and at the federal level with regard to us putting a proposition on. But if we have a proposition for a 66 passenger EV vehicle, and we then find that there are some funding opportunities, we could avail ourselves of those funding opportunities for this year? Or is that something like, would there be enough, depending if it doesn't come out until the end of April and then there's a process for it, like it's open for 3 months, is that something that we would have to wait for like the following year to look at those potentials, right? Because we don't know right now, we don't even know what the state is right now. There's the possibility there might be some funding at the state level. We are likely might be eligible for funding at the federal level. But we don't know when it's all going to come.
So it would have to do with the timing, but if the voters approved a ban in the amount of $350,000 for the purchase of, let's say we went forward with an electric bus and an ICE 20 passenger, let's say it was 475,000 bus ban. If the voters approved that, and let's say the price went down or we received funding through another source, we would not ban that full amount.
Because it's just a not to exceed
It's
amount.
just a not to
So we
exceed
could,
amount.
there is the potential that we could still take advantage of other funding
Take advantage of
opportunities
that
as
and
they come along.
finance below the authorization. And we have done that before
Mhm.
because prices have declined.
Josh, do you have a question?
You
look like
just
have a
asked my question.
Oh.
So, thank you very much, Sarah.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Iris?
So I just have one last pitch to please consider. With the capital reserve, is there a way, I know you want the flexibility, but I don't know if, I'm not sure I understand the rationale for why we would ever want to purchase an ICE vehicle from that reserve. So could you say for any non-ICE vehicle, would you think that's problematic?
Because, just to clarify, because you think that an ICE vehicle should come out of the operating budget.
No, because we bond those already. That's the way we
Yeah, like
fund.
just
Why are we gonna
bonding
switch
them.
and change
Right, but-
the way
okay.
we do things?
I
If
understand.
we,
Not because you're saying that we should not buy an ICE vehicle.
correct.
Okay,
Correct.
just to be clear.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying if the thought is we want to start building an electric fleet or any sustainable fleet, why would not make that designated for that purpose? And then otherwise just continue, if we're gonna do the, do the bond. Just my last plug for it.
Right, and
'Cause I don't see
I
understanding.
hear what you're saying, Iris. We don't know what the future holds with inflation. If, let's say, the fund was funded and we were in a position where we didn't want to add an increase to, let's say the levy was at the max, we didn't want to add an additional burden on the taxpayer. The board could decide, okay, this year we're not going to ban. We're going to purchase one electric school bus and one non-electric school bus, and we want it funded through the capital reserve so that there's not another ban issued on these vehicles. We could do that. If we did that, we would lose that flexibility.
It provides you flexibility as the cost of issuance goes up.
So this is my Machiavellian thought, though, is if you leave it to capital reserve, you have to get voter approval to spend.
Right.
And if the voters say no, then you don't have a bus.
But that's capital reserve.
That's what I'm saying, that's why I'm saying doing it into a capital reserve concerns me.
But that's
Because at
true.
least
If
it's a
it's true,
bond.
you don't have a bus
Yeah,
either.
but I know, but with the but that is done, when we do our vote and we've had success with that. We have not had, because you're saying, hey, look, I'm gonna purchase it for like 180, whatever. We haven't had issues with that. I'm worried that if it's in a capital reserve and it's off the cycle of when you're doing your budget, I'm just,
But it doesn't have to be off the cycle.
I'm just throwing it out there. I just am worried that you might pitching yourself into a position where you're.
It
Because
adds,
capital reserves do not get the same, my experience, we don't get the same voter
Support.
turnout. It's a much smaller number.
and you've turned one risk point into 2 risk points.
I mean, I think our last capital reserve, we may have had 100 people.
No, but there's nothing,
It's very-
there's nothing to say that, let's say in
Change.
May of 2023, if we have $500,000 in the capital reserve, and we say voters at the annual meeting, same time as we have the annual meeting, for our buses for next year, give us permission
Yeah.
to
That's
take
an
it out,
answer. That's
and
a
which I
solution.
think is mostly how we're gonna do it, because this, unlike capital construction, this is really something that is keyed to, and
Mhm.
traditionally has been keyed to the cycle of you ban at annual meetings for transportation. And, we would just say, instead of that, we would say, let us take it out of this bank account.
Okay, that was my last one
And,
for.
And the other thing I will say is, I know, because I pulled up this EPA press release. And they do talk about, the first $17 million handed out and $5 billion they expect to do in the next 5 years. If you think about it, $5 billion to replace, to help fund the replacement of all school buses is a drop in a big drop in the bucket instead of a tiny drop in the bucket. And there, I'm sure, are going to be criteria that will apply in terms of, district wealth, et cetera, which will not put us necessarily.
Correct. They've already stated that they will be prioritizing tribal schools, high needs districts and low income districts.
Yeah.
We are
Makes sense.
incidentally.
But they will be taking all lottery applications.
We are
So-
what?
Amongst those that apply.
Sure.
And we're in a position to
EPA
apply.
DERA grant right now, which we applied for probably a year and a half
Mhm.
ago. We were number, I think, 265 when I last looked, but we are on that grant.
Question about the capital reserve. So we have to put it to the public to vote on establishing it,
Right.
but not to fund it? The
Not
board
to
funds
fund it, but
Interesting.
to expend it.
Okay, interesting.
Different than the repair
The
reserve,
repair reserve, the
which you,
vote, yes,
you need voter approval to
to
fund
fund
it,
it.
but not to expend it.
So the projected fund balance for this year, we can decide to put it to any of the established reserves, or we can put a vote out to the public saying, do you want to take this money and put it into repair reserve? Is that
No,
how?
no, we
you do
would,
it?
what we would do is we would establish the reserve through the vote,
Mhm.
voter approve it, then it is established. And then as a board, the funding of that, so if we were to put a proposition up for the repair reserve, we would have to put the funding amount.
Yes,
If we put a capital reserve up for the transportation, we do not
No
have to put a
Yep,
funding
yep.
amount, we just have to put a maximum value.
That's weird that it's different from repair.
Yes.
because it requires
Because
the board to vote on extending it
Right.
for the repair.
For the repair reserve.
Right, because it's sort of somewhere in between operating expense versus
Mhm.
capital
Yeah.
And
expense.
it
I
can't be
gotcha.
for regular maintenance.
Yeah,
or
if the roof
operations.
leaking,
Gotcha.
pipe bursting.
It's meant for emergency spend, so if you needed to go to the public to vote on it, you'd be in trouble.
Did you have a recommendation for if we were to establish a repair reserve, what that funding level would be?
I was thinking very small to start. Maybe $100,000.
And then is that something, again, because I don't know much about the repairs, or is that like annually we would have to put it on there to add any additional funds to that reserve to fund any more? So like anytime, any year we wanted to add money to that fund, we would need to put a proposition on.
I believe so.
So
Because
now,
it's for funding.
the other question on that, since it's for emergencies, that if we have an emergency, as I recollect, is an ability, a right to borrow or otherwise utilize money in your unrestricted fund balance during the course of the year to deal with that emergency. Am I right? Or what happens? You know, if the boiler breaks, if, you know, the boiler breaks in this building a number of years ago, we needed to take a rent a boiler and we need to replace the boiler ASAP. So where does that money come from if you don't have a repair reserve?
Comes out of your operating budget.
Okay, so it comes, so basically in that situation, you need $100,000 to replace the boiler in this building. Okay, you're gonna have to lay off a teacher for that $100,000. Okay, is there, I know that with regard to certain issues like involving high a QRS, right, the state
Contribution.
passed,
the employer
say you
contribution
could
rate.
borrow from your funds to,
Right.
and you had to pay it back with interest, but there's
That
nothing in
has
that.
not occurred in.
There's
probably
nothing
10
in that
years.
for
No,
emergency repair.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
But I'm not under the impression that the repair reserve is exclusively for emergency expenditures.
It is. It is. It has to be for non-regular maintenance.
Non-regular maintenance, yes. It says it's used to pay the cost of repairs to capital improvements or equipment, which repairs are a type of not recurring annually or at shorter intervals. So unexpected, but not
Exactly.
necessarily emergency.
Yeah, okay.
Right, right. Unexpected is the language.
Anyone else have any questions on the capital reserves? The propositions? Okay, so in terms of next steps and what you would be looking for from us, from the board, I know you've heard from some of us. Would you like sort of thumbs up, thumbs down on each, on like the capital reserve,
Yep.
repair reserve, propositions, and if there's any discrepancy on that, what that proposition would be? It would be a one proposition is the
That's
recommendation,
it.
one plus proposition. Okay.
Tracy, can you pull up the slide again?
Oh, I can do
Oh, you
that.
can, I'm sorry. Yeah.
The next one? No, not that. Yeah,
You
that.
want to do it?
So, yeah,
Okay.
so I think
So,
it might be easier if we work from the bottom up to get to the propositions last. So I think would we want to put on the authorization to establish and fund a repair reserve to cover the cost of capital asset repairs? Is that something that we would like to see
In the amount of,
in the amount of $100,000?
so I just.
Dipping our toes in the water.
That, but that would basically mean that we would be committing at the end of this year in June to put the $100,000
that's
in.
correct.
It's not like we have any
That's correct.
discretion. Okay,
And we expect that we will have that flexibility at the end of the year in our unallocated fund balance and to be able to do that.
I have a question about that. I'm sorry. Do we have an estimate of the amount of money that we spent on repair in the last year?
Oh, this was a tough year. We lost the boiler at PVC. So it was in excess of that.
In excess of $100,000.
Yeah. I
And then we
believe
had
so,
the
all in all.
Panel, the electric panel go out here at the high school.
We had the transformer,
Yeah.
but we applied to our insurance for that and we received insurance funding. That was a big ordeal. But we did receive some reimbursement for that. But again, to Sarah's point, this establishment is actually the funding. So we are committing
Mhm.
to this funding for this reserve this year.
But we're not committing annually thereafter,
Right,
right? That would be another,
that would be,
We have to vote again.
and would that be a vote by the public to ask us to, for
fun.
voter
Mhm.
approval to
Mhm.
add
Yeah.
another 100,000 to this
Right.
reserve?
If you were gonna do that, yeah.
Right.
Yes. So,
Okay, so-
but to that point, so we have a limited reserve at the end of the year. It generally falls between 2% and 3% of our annual budget. If we did 100,000, that would mean that 50,000, that would mean that we would reduce our contribution to another. capital
reserve
reserve.
for that amount, for that
So to that
$100,000.
point, we could consider 50,000.
One, love to go the other direction, but I'll
Or-
defer to your
right.
judgment
Right.
as to the appropriate amount.
To Josh's point, we're dipping our feet in the water. I think that somewhere between, again, we only have fund balance projections from February.
Mhm.
And our March are not going to be done until January. I mean, until mid-April. So.
So
I'm
so
happy
we
to leave
might
that
wanna
at your
be slightly
discretion.
More conservative. We might want to be.
75, split the difference, 75.
Yeah,
that's- might as well just leave them in operations.
no,
point?
that's. It's.
I mean, I can align by 100. If the board is comfortable with 100, I can align behind that.
Well, question before we say come on, talk about the amount. Would you want us to have this discussion in April? Once you have a better. sense?
No, we can't.
We can't.
We gotta
We gotta
have
start
discussion.
sending out
the
Yeah.
materials.
Okay.
Right. I think 100,000 is a good number.
Okay, I can align behind it.
All right,
I
can I,
support that.
can I then, sorry, if I could get thumbs up, thumbs down on the repair reserve at 100,000, so I think,
Okay. All right, was that everybody's thumbs? I can't.
Yep.
yes, that was.
Okay.
All right, so now then moving up to the capital reserve for transportation at an amount of $2 million. Can I get a thumbs up, thumbs down on that? I've got 6 thumbs on that.
Well, you got 6 off. I don't know if Iris is this way or
Or
this way.
abstaining?
She didn't have a thumb.
No, yeah, I'll go down on it, because I kind of would want it to be designated more.
All right, so then that brings us to our proposition, so the transportation proposition. Now, the recommendation is for a 20-passenger ICE vehicle, a 66-passenger EV as one proposition at an amount not to exceed $475. Is that
Well,
I have that?
we're waiting on some figures.
rating on the, so we can determine that
Right,
figure
and
on
that's-
Monday when we finalize that proposition, but that is sort of the proposition that we would be looking at.
Correct.
So-
And we will most likely add some escalation to that amount because right now through the Office of General Services, where we purchase our transportation vehicles, they are talking about adding, right now they have an annual escalation that is allowed to distributors. They're talking about quarterly increase
Okay.
based on the state of our finances and the global market. And incidentally, someone had asked on the board about why we purchase off of the Office of General Services and why we wouldn't RFP. So the Office of General Services is a division of New York State. They vet every vendor on on the contract. So every bidder has to go through a vetting process. New York State is not a low bidder state for this contract. So not only the lowest bidder goes on this contract, every manufacturer that submits a bid and meets the bidding requirements is on that contract regardless of price. So they could be $1 million more than another manufacturer. If they meet the requirements, they are on that bid. Additionally, every single manufacturer that is on that bid has been vetted and approved by the Department of Transportation, which is our governing agency in this area. So that is why the New York is among one of the most stringent states in the country with regard to school bus safety and transportation. To RFP something as nuanced and new as an electric vehicle would be extremely risky for the district. I would never, ever recommend that at this point in the game. We want something that is thoroughly vetted by the Department of Transportation and other federal standards. So I hope that answers your question.
And to be clear, since this is not to exceed, if through any funding source, we are able to obtain some monies towards the 66 passenger EV, we won't be borrowing.
Correct.
That
Or would we be
full
borrowing
amount.
less?
We would be
We'll be
borrowing
that
less
full
than
amount.
that.
Right.
Correct. Okay.
So the wording of the proposition.
So the wording of the proposition would need to be finalized by, after we determine, right, with the basis of that proposition, then bond council would word it, and that's why we're having a meeting on Monday.
Yeah.
But also the
To-
wording of the proposition would not be like last year, which had got to pass one to do 2, 3, and
Correct,
4.
this is
It would
one
be a plain
proposition,
vanilla-
we'd be much more similar to our prior transportation ban propositions, that I would think that it was an amount not to exceed X.
So if the proposition fails to get support from the community, does that mean we can't purchase 2 buses?
Correct.
We have
That's
to
my
find
concern.
Unless we go and have a new vote,
Right,
on
we
the
could have a
proposition
new
on
vote.
another date.
Or you have to find another funding source.
Right. You would have to find another funding source, it would have to come out of
Yeah.
the general fund or operating budget, or you would hold another vote.
And there is no other funding source.
Yeah, so and then that's my concern. So that's why do we want to split it? So I guess the rationale of having as one, is it just
It's
last year's support for the initiative?
It's about trying not to divide along the lines of EV versus ICE. It's about saying, we think for next year, this is the best in totality step for the district to take, and we're asking people to vote on that step in totality, rather than saying, I support EV versus I support ICE. I think that's potentially more divisive.
And then you can have the same problem. Because if they vote down one or the other.
Correct.
Still.
Still,
Right.
Yeah.
The totality is 166 passenger school bus and 120 passenger minibus without specifically saying which is.
Well, the
or what
board would
is-
need to
you would need to
determine
determine
tonight
what
the
yeah.
direction that they would want to go. If they wanted to go to ICE. Well, we can't go.
Why
do
would we
two-
need to do that? Why can't we just ask for approval of?
Purchasing buses and the decision of electric or.
To what the
In
situation.
order to
Situation.
transfer
Situation.
finance
I think
law,
it's
you need
transparent.
to establish your intent in order to ask for financing.
Well,
We've never asked the
We
public
never-
whether they wanted to buy a gas bus or a diesel bus.
We never have until last year.
Mhm.
We never have until last year.
But that was tied to.
Right.
Tied to
We
funding.
could just say for transportation vehicles, the amount of, for 2 transportation vehicles not to exceed 500,000. We could.
That's what I
We
would,
That's what
could.
I would do.
that's what I would recommend.
I think.
I
think-
don't,
The
yeah, I have
only question-
concerns with that over from a transparency
Well,
perspective.
except I want to point out that and I'm looking for it now.
We don't know what a 66 passenger electric school bus is gonna cost a year from now, 22, 23.
No, we don't,
Or
but
20.
we have to.
And we
have to
also,
reasonably-
yeah, we don't know if they're gonna be available. And that also doesn't reflect the infrastructure costs involved with
It should be phrased to
outfitting
allow
our
for
depot.
infrastructure, too.
Like, I have a real issue with tying, as we sit here having conversations about not tying our hands in all sorts of other ways, I have a real issue with all of a sudden this particular issue not being transparent because we're trying to make efforts to not tie the district's hands in terms of spending this money. I mean, it's
One or the other.
it's one or the other. We're either like trying to give ourselves leeway to make necessary decisions across the board, or we're not. So I don't think it's a lack of transparency to not be specific with respect to this about an electric bus. And I again, I'm like very concerned about this push to be specific with respect to this as catering to, you know, what's perceived to be a public sentiment about this.
So I would only, Neil, if I could just jump in for a quick second. I would only say, I think it was 2 years ago, we had the discussion, our intent was to purchase EV. Our intent was to purchase, and we put out a bus proposition that just said vehicles. And then because of the way everything, I think it was because of, I don't know if you were here, Denise, but because of the way I don't even remember, but there were issues with getting an EV bus. We ended up purchasing ICE buses. And then it was like, well, we weren't, that's when we went out to the voters, we had said our intent was to purchase EV.
Right.
Yet, like July 1st, we ordered a non-EV.
Because we couldn't get one.
No, it wasn't, we couldn't get one. It was some other issue. It was,
Right, but
it
this is
wasn't
different.
that. So it was a question of, when we came to last year's cycle, to be transparent. What is it we're gonna be asking the community when we ask for this?
And you
money?
were very
What are we gonna-
specific with respect
So
to
we were
that.
very specific.
Right.
So in terms of, that's why the transparency in terms of, I'm arguing it's transparency, because if we're not going to be saying we're committing to the EV bus, then
we don't know.
We're not saying we're committing to EV.
Yeah, but we don't know. And the
So
fact of the matter
that's
is that
the
we need.
I'm just telling you, that's the transparency word. The word of transparency came because if we know we're going to be purchasing an EV bus,
But we don't know.
then that's what we should be saying.
But we don't know.
So,
We know we have a need for 166 passenger bus and 120 passenger minibus, but we don't know what the availability is. We don't know what the cost will be. We're in a very unique situation. I don't think that that's a lack of transparency. I think it's being more transparent to say.
I see your point, but I guess it's just for the.
That's part of our job and explaining it to the public then, I think.
Yeah.
Neil?
Yeah, what I was gonna say is, I understand the need, and I agree with transparency, but the one thing that I note is that I believe the Bethlehem School District put their proposition up last year for the purchase of up to, for 6 vehicles, 6 big school buses, for $1,675,000. And the wording of their proposition, which I thought I had, and I may have on my computer, but it was not for the purchase of electric vehicles. They said to the public, we've put this amount in because it is our intention to purchase electric vehicles. Once again, not to exceed. But the proposition language, and I hope I can find it, was not specific.
See, I think that's not
because-
transparent.
Now, because, yeah, and maybe that's not transparent and we would not want to do what Bethlehem did. Maybe bond counsel, and I remember last year bond counsel said we have to be transparent. And therefore, that's why we put the propositions the way we did to cover our bases. And so maybe we are better off having specifically a 66 passenger electric vehicle and a 20 passenger ICE vehicle. And, you know, that is more transparent than perhaps they did. But it's a question of whether we're allowed to do it the way Bethlehem did.
We are absolutely allowed to do it that way. And the reason why Bethlehem was able to do that is because what they went out for as far as their bond proposition, the dollar value was not that different than their regular annual bond proposition, because they were counting on $200,000 per EV vehicle.
So in other words, if they
Because
didn't get
of
that
their
money, they would have bought
demographic.
fewer vehicles. Got it.
Right, right. So their demographic gave them 100 for every vehicle, where we only got 120. And they were purchasing so many vehicles that they could just put a very generic
Okay,
proposition up, which we could, and we have in the past. It's a matter of, you know, what the
informative.
board would prefer as far as
I mean, the
clarifying
number-
their intent.
What's the number indicates, would also indicate that we are intending.
Yeah, we're being
to buy
clear.
electric, because it's $425,000 plus, right? You said plus, so.
Yeah.
I just don't, we don't have a crystal ball. I don't think that you can earmark that towards an electric vehicle without knowing what the availability is, or what the price will be, or what the infrastructure costs will be, or whether there's somebody available to do the infrastructure work to the district to house this. I don't think that that's.
Well, I mean, the infrastructure has to be in place for this September bus. It
Mhm.
would be for purchasing the bus for next year.
and so the question.
We wouldn't
is-
need additional infrastructure if it was just the two.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Correct.
Well, I mean, I don't know if Joe's still there. Hi, Joe.
Joe's
Joe.
snoring.
He's
You
there.
in the-
I hope.
Hello.
Getting ready for tomorrow morning.
Yeah, Joe's gotta be in bright and early.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the
Is he there?
question.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay, so Joe, if we were to get a second electric bus that the voters approved this May, and we have a lead time to get it, would we need significant or any additional infrastructure to be able to power up those two buses?
So
Or
my
can you-
understanding is that when the infrastructure is taken care of for the initial vehicle that we receive, we can prepare to have a second vehicle ready to be charged. But there would be additional work and additional cost for the second vehicle infrastructure. Not as much, because let's look at it as if you were you had a gas tank. Probably not a good example to use, but you had a gas tank and you got everything all set. You had the tank underground and you had half of it separated for diesel and the other half for gas. You were all set for gas. Now the other half of the tank is already underground, so it's just a matter of putting the diesel in there and connecting a pump, as opposed to having to do the entire infrastructure altogether.
There would still
That
be
makes
additional-
sense.
And if this ballpark, if we're talking about that, remember, we're talking about something that may not actually be done until the summer of 2023. But do you have any sense of what we're talking about in terms of additional infrastructure costs just to be able to accommodate two buses?
That I'm not sure of. That I'd have to check on that.
You don't know the availability of people to do this work either. I mean, that's my concern.
We had to hook up a line here at the high school related to our $20.8 million bond authorization back in 2016. And it took them a year, took Con Ed a year to get here to make the connection. So, yeah.
And we've also been trying to get Con Ed for the past month now to come to the transportation yard to give us an idea as to what we would actually need in order to increase the wattage that we need for the electric vehicle. And it's already been a month we're trying to get them to come.
They're stretched in every way.
Yep.
And now with this new initiative, it's going to take time.
If the electric vehicle was approved, but then you couldn't get it, right? You're saying you'd have to use the operating budget fund a 66 passenger bus, right, that you would need?
We would need voter approval first.
No, I
No,
think,
if you get-
if we can't buy the bus, we just can't get it delivered, and we need to
electric bus.
replace the electric bus. Since the approval exists for 5 years, right? That is an approval that we use for next year, but in the interim, we would have to get a bus. We could lease a bus for $20,000 out of the operating. We could buy a bus out of the operating budget. But that would seem to me to be the thing that we would have to do if we could not get the
Yeah, so my
electric
question
vehicle
is,
on this.
could we
Schedule
use
1.
from the capital reserve that we met, the transportation capital reserve? To fund that?
No, because we don't have any money in it yet.
But
But
when
it
it
would
has-
be by the end of the
When
year.
By the end of the
it
year,
has
yeah.
money in it.
But
But then
we
we'd have
voter
to,
approval.
then we'd have to set, we'd have to do a vote in
Right.
order to use
But
that.
just to,
Yeah.
But if you wrote it with the language, it said that it was just for transportation and infrastructure costs, you could potentially use that to lease vehicles also?
No.
No,
Lease has to come out, yeah.
operating budget.
So my concern with having it as one proposition is if you have people that say we didn't go far enough, or people that say, you know what, it's too expensive, I don't want to do it, and they vote it down, we don't have anything to fall back on. And that's not even addressing the concerns that you raised, and they're valid. I mean, what about the timing issues?
I would be more committed to informing the community that the administration is thoughtful in their process, committed to electric long-term, but also trying to fiscally balance responsibility to the district and our students. And in doing that, giving them options in a time that is very, very volatile. That's my soapbox I'll stand down from.
over $500,000 too. which is,
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so the proposition has to have an amount. right?
Try not to exceed it.
So if we say
Which types of vehicles?
we have to specify,
No, but the board is going to have to specify whether they want to do one EV,
Sure.
one ICE, or two ICE, because that will determine the
The
value
value of the
of the
proposition.
ban itself. So we have to determine how much we're asking the voters to finance.
Right, how
How
much?
about-
Right,
how
and in
about-
Bethel, the amount was so similar,
Yeah.
but here it's not. It's like
Not.
triple.
How about we do this, that we say not to exceed, based on the cost of what you recommended, 66 electric and a 20 combustion. It had a caveat, if you can deliver it, like with all the everything that was stipulated, right? If practicable, I don't know what the right word is,
Stipulations.
right? So it gives you the
That's what kills
flexibility
it.
to say, yes, this is the intent. The intent is to go and get one electric, one combustion. But if things go off one way or the other, maybe we end up with two electric or two combustion.
We still don't have our first electric to understand what the experience is with that. And we're already committed to spending twice as much on another bus. Another electric bus. We still don't know.
And what,
Like, I really do read last year's voters as saying, we're happy to pilot this. We didn't expect to have to wait a year to get it. We didn't expect the price to double.
they said yes on 3 though.
Yeah, I think the only problem with that, I mean, I hear these, I think the only problem is, I don't know if we ever phrased this conversation last year as a pilot.
No, I think it was understood.
Yeah.
These are new
So,
buses. I don't think anybody was like, yes, we're getting rid of every single, I mean, I certainly wasn't. I was willing
Yeah.
to vote in favor of something that I thought was very interesting and definitely the direction that we're gonna go in.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think.
And we were also taking public funds for it. We were taking
Mhm.
grants, okay?
Yeah. we were
Right?
very
Because I don't know
much-
that I would have been in favor of it if it would have been like strictly all of the district's money either.
Yeah, no, so only thing I was gonna say is, I guess, for me, I'm just trying to figure out where we're at as a board. The commitment last year was we were moving towards electrifying our fleet. That was the definite question we were trying to put forward to the voters is, do you want to move in this direction or not yet? And we were always saying we want to do it strategically and fiscally smart. So I guess for me.
Which are worlds apart right now.
For me, well, so see, for me, I don't see the electric bus delivery as any different than the ICE bus delivery. Right now, all vehicles are suffering that same shortage. So it's going to be an issue.
No.
As a person who just had to get a vehicle, I
know,
it's very stressful. So I don't know. Denise and the administration recommended the electric bus. Well, you didn't recommend, but you were thinking electric bus. I'd just like to hear from you. If you foresee this as being a no, come next year, you have no bus. If voter approved, you still, you don't believe, do you not believe you'll have a bus, or are you for some reason optimistic?
I do believe.
You think this is possible?
Yeah, I do.
Because part of what took us so long this year to get our bus is the grant process, and that whole process extended out the time. Like this time around, we would be putting in just a purchase order for that bus, and it would be going, right? So it would be a lot quicker to start to get to
right away.
manufacture.
Right, but even still, most of our buses take 6 to 8 months. They're not standard off the rack. We have, unique needs in the district, so,
But
yeah, I do believe that we
When do you need the buses back?
we need the buses ideally by early next year.
January
Early
2023.
23.
January 2023.
also these buses.
That's when we need them to be on the road,
So
right?
to
Which is
Anna's
why they would
point,
be in
Then
this.
these buses would be on the road
Right.
before we have really an understanding of how they function. I mean, that function, is it really gonna function differently? It's more how
It's
the,
very different.
it does, the functioning of it is different, or the way the driver has to get used to it and the maintenance?
It's driver training,
Uh-huh.
it's navigating the cold weather and the mountainous terrain, it's training our mechanics. And it's a shift.
So to Anna's point, we wouldn't have had that.
And we don't
full
know
year
what we don't
cycle.
know.
Yeah.
So when you said you think it would be possible, what you're saying is what you recommended. That we would have those buses in our hands when we need them, the 66
Yes,
electric and the
providing-
20.
What we would have to do is that we would have to put a letter of intent out that is contingent upon voter approval.
Letter of intent tomorrow or after we pass the proposition saying, this is on the ballot, we want to buy this. You know, it's sort of like, you're gonna get a mortgage, okay, I'm gonna buy it. If I get the mortgage, the voters
Right.
give us the mortgage, yep, we're gonna buy, and you can process the order on the 20th of May. And then if we're talking 6, 8, 9 months, that carries us to early 2023.
But I will repeat, our projections are extremely conservative. We have a few vehicles that are slated for 22, 23 that have caused us many issues, even just this past week. So.
Not to mention the safety issue with that. Like, I know our buses are amazingly inspected by our professionals at the bus depot, but the older they are, you're running into safety issues with our students on them.
And that's our primary concern.
Right.
So, just something that came to mind. If we're just gonna have a one proposition, I understand the risk of being divisive. But are we really giving voters a choice in the matter of saying which direction you want to go? Because the choice in my mind is, you really didn't give me a choice. You're telling us we need buses, and it's this or nothing.
Yeah.
So is that the right
Well,
phrasing?
and you know what, if they say no, we can have another whack at it.
Can we?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely, we
Oh,
could have
okay.
another vote.
Of the proposition. just
We
the
could have
proposition.
another vote of a different proposition.
Right.
This year.
Yeah, we
No,
could do
we
it.
could not do it this year.
Well, we have the machines until June. Well, right, we wouldn't have the bond. We
No,
wouldn't be able to get
no,
the
no. When you
proposition
say
out
this
there.
year, meaning what we could do if we decided is we could say, voters, you voted it down. You voted down one proposition or voted both of them down. And we need to go back to you. We're gonna have a vote in August or September. And we're gonna go and spend the money to rent the machines from the state, I mean, from the county, and we're gonna run a proposition, a vote just on that in September. So the question really is, and I know we're talking about scenarios and possibilities. That obviously puts everything behind by 4 months, which means the time then to order, et cetera, is that much. So really the question comes, are you better off having 2 separate propositions, one for one bus, one for the other bus? See how it happens, or putting them together?
It seems to me that we're trying to combine a referendum on electrification with a standard annual bus renewal. And I think that's where I'm getting a little bit, not confused, but I'm concerned.
I think
We
there's
tried
no
to-
perfect way to do it because
Yeah.
both scenarios present their own set of problems.
Having experienced the way we did it last year, I feel pretty strongly that we should have a single proposition. I just explaining it to people last year was,
So
I'm never gonna get that hair back.
Me either.
We just have to communicate really, really well.
Yeah.
And make sure everybody understands the implication.
Yeah.
But again,
We have to do that anyway.
You're not giving me a choice.
Yeah.
As a voter, you're not really giving me a choice.
We have a choice. It's just that your
Um,
choice here
The
is,
choice is either
it's a different
paying more
choice.
for electric school bus or potentially risk the district not having a bus and needing to.
Resource or something
That's
else.
not really
Yeah.
a choice.
No, you cannot have an alternative vote. It's.
Right.
It's impossible.
So,
It's unfortunate, but.
And we don't
I don't know,
have $20,000 to lease, so we can figure out if electric buses are a
Ranked
good
choice
thing.
voting for propositions.
Up to.
Not
would be
in,
great.
not in our existing budget.
so, I mean, from what I'm hearing, like everybody else, I kind of the question of separating it out, which I think is what's in your head, might be fairer to the voters. And, you know,
Risk confusing and being divisive, yeah.
but I'm not sure, and I'm wondering what everybody else.
So again, I guess then, yes, aside from the, without necessarily delving into this specific writing, the specific language of the proposition, how do people feel about one proposition for funding 2 vehicles at not to exceed, generally 500,000, we'll get that final
Approximately.
number. So,
Without specifying whether they're EV or.
well, I guess sort of philosophically, how do you feel about having one proposition first?
It doesn't specify.
No,
Before we get
whether
to
it
that.
does or it doesn't.
Do you want one proposition or do you want 2 propositions?
She's just doing
Is
the
there
last
like,
Depends on how they're
do you
written.
want?
It's all contingent.
Just trying
I know.
Welcome to our world, Lucas. I've stayed long enough.
I'm sorry.
I will say,
I commend you.
to Omar's point is that I believe that certain individuals will be inherently opposed to being put in that position where they would have to vote. In order to vote for electric, they would also have to vote for ICE. I think that would cause just some cognitive dissonance on their part. Yes, I'm seeing a yes.
The opposite way too. though.
And the
opposite way,
opposite, the opposite.
Mhm.
So
I gotta pay
to
more.
that
I
point,
wanna pay. Yeah.
So then maybe I should ask it the other way. Would the majority of the board prefer there to be 2 propositions that then become much more specific in their writing?
Or option 3, 1 proposition without specifying, but a maximum amount that can fund both, right? That is enough to cover an electric, which is the intent if it comes through.
Denise doesn't seem comfortable.
I'd like to say yes, but we do need to establish our intent. I believe finance law requires that we establish our general intent. I don't think that finance law would have ever foreseen that we would need to identify the type of vehicle. But I do believe that we do need to imply our intent. But on the other hand, as Bethlehem did, they did not imply their intent.
You're a true economist, Denise.
They did.
On the one hand, on the
Yeah, I
other.
On the third
So-
hand.
So, yeah, at the risk of getting us all to
We do need to.
coming to a consensus here.
I think one proposition, I'm gonna say that, I don't think that I don't think that we even as a board micromanage the district to the extent to be able to sign off on things with that level of specificity. So I'm not in favor of breaking it out.
I'm sorry.
So you are in favor of the one proposition?
I am in favor of the one
Oh,
proposition.
what? I thought you said you weren't in favor. of one.
Okay.
That's why I was curious. Okay.
Everyone else? Anyone else?
One
Everyone else?
proposition.
One proposition?
How many?
1, 2, 3, 4,
I think
5.
you got-
I'm
you
wasn't
got
counting
five.
my.
I'm kind of
We've
in the
got
middle,
5,
I'm
but-
like,
Yeah.
But that's all right.
My
It's
concern,
consensus.
yeah, I mean, my concern is if it doesn't pass, it's putting the district in a very difficult position. So you just have to do an amazing job with communicating.
We
the
will.
importance of this.
To the extent they were allowed to do so by law.
Yeah.
Correct.
Correct.
All right, so so we've got 5.
Are you guys really not
We're-
voting?
No, I'm kind of abstaining. I'm
I
like.
think to
That's
maybe
what,
clear.
that's
with
what not
people,
voting means.
but-
Abstaining means not
Yeah,
voting.
yeah, but that's okay. That's
All right,
okay because.
just
you
checking.
know,
The lawyer was creating that at 11:15.
But I guess the other question is, and we are in agreement of it, that this one proposition is going to be for,
So the one proposition for
500.
500,000 for 2 vehicles, and this is me, I personally would like to hear the recommendation of bond counsel
Yes.
as to what the optimal language for that proposition is. Right, that's, which obviously we are going to get that, that language and that advice from bond counsel for the Monday meeting, which we are then going to be approving these ballot propositions. So that is because I do think, I know there's some vagueness to the finance law, but I do think that we do need to signal our intent. And
Let's
that
let
we-
bond counsel,
But
I
I-
want to hear bond counsel's
Right.
opinion on that topic.
Yeah, our bond counsel is extremely conservative.
I've noticed.
Yes.
Extremely
conservative.
extremely conservative.
So I will get their recommendation.
Well, I would put it to them that I would tell them explicitly that the board was
Mixed.
of mixed opinion on whether the proposition should explicitly say for the purposes of EV or just for the purposes of buses.
And also,
And get them decide, let bond counsel respond to that.
right. Although I know from purpose of the way bond propositions are written, there are things that you say and there are things that you don't say. So the education of the community, as Omar was talking about, is not going to be in the wording of the proposition itself. It's going to be in the explanatory
Right.
material. that we
The
provide.
proposition will confuse them.
Right.
That's what I'm
that's
saying,
what
that
we
maybe
want
the
wording
proposition should not say, and we should say the reason, and we can always, in our supporting material, we can always say the reason why this proposition is of the size that it is because it is our intent
Correct.
to purchase a 66 passenger electric vehicle if one is available. Or something like that. I don't know what that wording is, but
Not that.
not that.
And that would obviously have to be.
Okay, great. Like,
with-
okay, back to the
Council.
communications committee again.
Do you need anything else from us?
I do not.
Sure.
Okay.
So
here.
we will then be holding a special meeting, Tracy will notice it later, for Monday at 8 AM,
Monday at 8 AM, it's virtual,
virtual meeting.
Monday.
but Denise, we should have that in place for them to review before.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah,
Also,
we,
the annual notice will be out there, which includes the propositions, because I have to have that legally in the paper by the end of the week.
correct.
Right.
So we will notice that tomorrow. We will notice that meeting.
As soon as I
As
get.
soon as we-
the-
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. And with that, then,
Wait, do you want it noticed tomorrow, or do you want to review them before I notice this meeting?
No, no.
Because I have to put that up.
we need to notice.
You need to notice the meeting because you.
Oh,
unless-
well,
You don't have to
24
send me an
hours.
actually, we don't
agenda.
need to, we can notice, you can notice the meeting on Saturday.
That's what I was
Yeah.
going to do.
Yeah,
Saturday.
that's fine. You can
After
notice the
guys
meeting on
review
Saturday
their
morning after we reviewed it.
propositions.
That's fine.
Wow.
Because
Wait.
it just needs to be 24 hours. It doesn't need to be 24 business hours.
No.
We'll have the agenda.
Yeah.
by then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's
I
fine.
don't know, I mean-
All right. I just wanted
I
to
think-
mention that that's, the next step will be to vote on these propositions and the annual notice at Monday's special meeting. And if no one else has any other questions or comments, recommended action that the Board of Education adjourn the meeting at 11:20 PM.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstained, motion carried. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Never talk in your office.